brought to you by Skippy, America's largest selling peanut butter. If you like peanuts, you like Skippy. And here's your host.
Us! Here's your hosts with the most.
Awesome. That was
We'll
awesome.
spread that Skippy on some toast.
See, that was when Skippy was good.
And then I'll cook a pot roast. And at Halloween, I'll dress up as a ghost.
Yeah, those were the days when Skippy was just real peanut butter.
If I got to take a letter to the post. If we were back in the 80s, we'd be dealing with glass nost. Okay, I'm stopping. So Skippy peanut butter?
Yeah.
What was the one that you were hipping me to? Cream nut.
Cream nut.
Tell me about cream nut because I've never had it.
Cream nut is peanut butter that you can get now, when you can get it, where you can get it. And the two local stores that carried it no longer carry it. But it's the kind of peanut butter that Skippy probably was when that ad was made.
Vintage.
Peanuts. It's peanuts ground up and put in a jar. That was it.
Okay.
Skippy is still a brand. It's still around, except it's palm kernel and or wheel bearing and or shock absorber oil with salt, sugar, and a drop of Vicks Vapor Rub. I don't know.
Oh yeah, get that camphor going. A little bit of camphor.
Yeah.
Get a little Bengay flavor in your peanut butter.
Hobo says, they improved it with cottonseed oil or some tasty substitute.
Hey guys, how you doing, man? You guys are already firing up the questions. That's awesome. It's good to see everybody. So I think we'll obviously talk about what we're drinking as we usually do, but in terms of how we're going to do this, we have a big list of questions that we put together that we really want to do our best to get through tonight. But probably the format will be answering a few questions from this list, and then we'll get into the peanut gallery tonight and answer one or two from there, go back to the list, and hopefully we'll get through the whole thing before the sun shines again. We are making an attempt. Maybe I shouldn't even say this because some people like the length. We're trying to cut down the length, guys, just a little bit. Because the 4-hour shows is 4 hours.
Yeah. Just as an experiment. Just see if you guys don't have any problem with the length, and most of you say you don't, and we appreciate that, and that's great. But just humor us. Let's try to rein one in, and just so we can say that we can, and then
right,
and if it works out cool, great, and if it doesn't, great.
And one of our biggest fans, Niko-Chan, has actually gave us the criticism that maybe we need to cut down the length a little bit. So maybe Niko-Chan will make an appearance later tonight and tell us how we're doing.
So what are you drinking there, Bob?
What am I drinking? I'm drinking the Port Charlotte 2012 heavily peated Isle of Barley, 50% ABV. So I got to go slow. It's semi-cask strength. And, if I'm not drinking mezcal or tequila, I just hit the Islas. The big dirt and smoke in a glass is what makes me happy. So
what is semi-cask strength?
Oh, well, I just look at anything over 50% ABV. I don't even know if that's the official
the term.
ABV, alcohol by volume.
No. Semi-cask strength.
Semi-cask strength. So cask strength is the original strength of the spirit as they pull it out of the cask that it's been being matured at, which is like, nuclear death strength. And, then they add water and chill it the hell out so that it's actually consumable. But in general.
You mean by people outside of Alaska? Right?
Yeah, exactly. But, I like the cask strength spirits because you can always add water if you want to open it up yourself, and you're not quite feeling it that evening. But in general, I like to drink the cask strength because it's just a much richer experience.
Mm.
And
Hubble says cask strength is about 150 proof, so that's about Everclear that you can get in a gallon jug in Alaska for. Well, last time I was in Alaska, it was $12, but you can put it in your tank.
No, I saw someone was drinking Akantoshan up here. Who had that? I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna find you. Where was it? Cask strength is about 150 proof. Okay, where was it? Who's
all right? We're gonna have a debate about cask strength or not.
Oh, PJ's got the Akantoshan. American oak. Interesting.
Everclear espresso. Ooh, now we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, baby. That's like
drinking
alcoholics. What did they call it? What did they call it when you mixed cocaine and heroin together?
That's speedball.
Yeah. So Everclear and espresso, it must be the alcoholic speedball.
Yeah, we need a term for that.
Yeah.
So Steve, what the hell are you drinking?
Well, I have a story.
Oh, story time. So
it was gonna be Casadoras. I might have mentioned Casadoras before.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite as inexpensive as Commemorativo, but it's great for margaritas. It's not necessarily a sipping tequila either, but it's just a good all-around tequila, especially for making margaritas.
Okay.
And my employees gave me a bottle of it for my birthday on a couple of different occasions. So apparently one of them went out and researched it and decided that this was a good one to have, or somebody in their family really liked it or something, and I really liked it. So I hadn't had it in a while, and the place that I usually go, every place that I usually go was out of Commemorativo, so I grabbed the Casadoras to try. And as you can tell by the bottle, we were sort of vetting out margaritas this week to come up with a good recipe for the show, and took my car into the shop on Wednesday to get some work done on it, and was supposed to be back on Friday. And here it is, Saturday evening, and my car never came back. So I never made it to the store to get more limes and lemons, and therefore the Cazadora recipe didn't come to fruition because I couldn't make it. So
Hiss.
I like tail between my legs, all hangdog style, had to go slogging back to the lowly Herradura legend, and woe is me. Poor,
but you know what?
pitiful me.
I remember you telling me the last time you were drinking that you had the most interesting non-hangover hangover from that stuff, where it wasn't a headachy thing, but it was like almost like lobotomy the next day.
Yeah.
So fair warning.
Yeah, it wasn't like a hangover, oh my head hurts. It was like in a dream when you're swimming underwater, but you don't really feel like you urgently have to get to the surface to get air. You're just doing this. So that was the feeling that I had the last time I brought that on the show, and a 4-hour show. The next day I was doing this basically all day.
No, you were drinking the blackened when Dave was on the show.
No, the blackened was the last show. Blackened was the last show. I checked.
Oh, okay.
I actually checked, so I would be chronologically correct. I had the Blackened on the
was that last time?
On the What You Need episode.
Oh, okay, that was last time. Well,
so yeah, that's still around. That's a favorite around the house now, but the Legend is totally where it's at too, so it's just fine.
That's wonderful. We got some 14-year-old Glenlivet, our friend Jeremy. Beautiful. Like I said before, Bear's got the Woodford Rye. Get some spicy rye action going. Blanton's. What else? Anybody else?
Jägermeister and Goldschlager on the rocks.
Drinking a V8.
Scott says Jägermeister and I lost it. Jägermeister. Oh, this stupid thing. Come on.
Jaeger.
Jaeger
and Goldschlager. Oh,
and Goldschlager is called a dirty Nazi. And I will posit that's being too easy on being a dirty Nazi. So that'll be my political statement for that.
Man, Jaeger and Goldschlager. That's headache in a bottle, man. Oh, that's bad news. Well, shall we talk? Well, shall we answer some questions?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, wait. Kelly's drinking a Dr. Pepper. Oh, but he's had a couple porters. That's nice. Yeah, totally. That is a painful combo. Let's not discuss that anymore. I don't even want to think about it. All right. So, guys, the first question. This is from Brendan Lucero. It says, hey, Steve, I've always wondered why your amps haven't been marketed as much as, say, a Boogie or a Marshall. I only know of your VHT name by a Mudvayne vid and a Helmet Live vid. So we want to know, I don't know. Why aren't you on the pop charts of, top of the pops with on the amp charts?
Well, relative to Mesa and Marshall, they're much larger companies than we are, and especially were at the time of the videos that you're talking about. So a much larger marketing budget on the part of those companies. The whole marketing is really a game.
Okay.
And the name of the game is hook up with as many influential or visible artists as you can and co-opt their output to apply to your brand, regardless of whether your product had anything to do with their success, sound, or anything else.
Right.
It's just important to put your brand in front of them, regardless what they recorded their record with. Mm-hmm. And in the process, they appropriate the sound that you know the artist for, and and get credit for it by dint of the marketing relationship. Okay. So, and Marshall is the kings of that.
Well, they had intense, they won the lottery in the late 60s, right? In terms of, being in the right place at the right time with the right artists. And then I'm sure that they had, a nice war chest full of money to kind of,
Well, plus they didn't really have any competition per se.
Mm-hmm.
So that always helps, being in the ground, at the ground floor of a new game, right?
Yeah.
So they're still marketing off of that to this day.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a big advantage there. But also, we started out really being known for power amps more than amps and cabs, say, for example. And at that time, even the guys that were doing appearing to use rows and rows of heads and cabinets on stage weren't. They were using racks of stuff in the back line powering everything.
Sure.
But they were just like anybody. Hey, my fantasy is to stand in front of 12 Marshall stacks.
Sure.
When you get in the position to be able to do that, Motley Crue and all these different bands that EVH and anybody that finally had a tour budget that would support hauling all that gear around, just load the stage up with Marshalls. And as a result of that, Marshall gets all the credit for whatever sound is coming out, regardless of what is actually generating the sound and regardless of what was used to record the record.
Sure.
So we had Pittbull amps, and we had people that were recording with Pittbull amps and using our power amps, recording in the studio and using our power amps with other preamps and stuff, and going out and touring with our power amps on their rigs. But what you would see on the stage is Marshall cabs.
Yeah.
And then somebody with a camera would go back and look at the back line and see rows of our power amps back there, but that isn't what the general public sees.
Sure.
And, we sort of understand that's the reality of the business. There's some artists that they're a lot more malleable because they want help from the manufacturers. They want tour support, so they kind of play into it a little bit, and that causes a little friction. For example, we loaned a bunch of gear to an artist to make a record, to record his record. It's going to be your stuff all over the whole record. I only want to use your stuff on the record. And then after the record came out, he had a pretty well-known producer produce it, and he had one song that was starting to get a little traction out of it, and Fender offered him an endorsement for a guitar. And so he started using a Fender guitar because he got an endorsement deal with Fender to use one of their guitars.
Sure.
And a lot of times they will say, we can provide you with amps too if you like, but if you're happy with what you're using, it's okay too, whatever.
Come behind door too, little boy.
Yeah. And this one particular guy went, yeah, I can do the amps, sure. But it wasn't just I can do the amps. It was a newsletter. It was marketing.
Yeah.
And Fender had come out with a new model of amp, and on his newsletter, which he sent to us because we were on his address list, we get this newsletter from the guy saying, check out the new Fender blah, blah, blah amp on my album. I use this amp for all the tracks on my record.
Oh, dude.
Now, that's where I go.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Oh,
that's like a stab in the back. That's not
that's ouchy.
Servicing a relationship. That's not coming to us and saying, hey, look, I got an opportunity as an artist. I need to take advantage of it because it's going to help my career. And I'll be sure and give you credit where credit is due, but I'm going to be doing this and I'm going to try to manage it so that you guys don't get dissed in the process. There's that, or there's the other. I only care about me, and whatever you did for me before, that meant nothing.
Yeah. Because look at me. I'm a few rungs higher on the ladder. Fuck off,
Yeah. And so we've had that happen, but I don't really care about that because that's just the kind of, it's almost sort of like the clearinghouse, okay, those are the people that you have to watch for. And they're going to do what they're going to do. And that's okay. That's not going to be the basis of a long-term relationship. And, people come and go, and amp companies come and go, and all this. Right. So what does it really matter? Well, it only matters if you have a certain level of integrity of an artist where that it should matter, and it does. And if it doesn't, that's, okay.
I remember learning kind of how that worked, not with the endorsement thing, although I don't know if endorsements were involved or not, because I don't remember him being an endorser of Marshall. But I remember opening up for George Thorogood, and there was George doing his thing, and he had a rhythm guitarist, and they set up the wall of Marshalls on the stage. And I get off stage, they're loading on, doing their whole thing, and their set starts. I'm going, what the hell is so loud backstage here? I'm like, where's this coming from? And I found it. George was actually playing through, oddly enough, a Mesa Mark I. That was just screaming backstage, and that's what was mic'd. But they had the Great Wall of Marshalls on the stage. So, that's how that works.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. It's all show. I mean, it's showbiz, right?
Yeah.
So that going in, and what it's like being out there, and it's tough. And you got managers involved, and once you get managers involved, the whole dynamic starts changing in the relationship, because then you're dealing with somebody who isn't thinking in terms of artistic integrity. They're thinking in terms of career. What can I do to shave $12,000 off the budget, off the touring budget? Marshall's going to give us all the cabinets and have cabinets available for us on a nationwide tour. Yeah. So every city that we come into, there are cabs. And what the companies like Mesa and Marshall would do is they loan at no charge to all the rehearsal places, all the major rehearsal outlets around the country, SIR, and so on and so forth. All these different outfits in Nashville, in New York, and in Los Angeles, and wherever else would have loaner gear there that those rental companies could rent to local people and keep the proceeds of the rental. In exchange, they have to provide that gear at no charge to the artist who comes into town and plays in their town. So in that way, they make sure that they seamlessly sort of co-opt whatever output that artist is doing and the association with the gear that they're representing. We do that to a certain extent too. When artists that we work with come into town and do whatever the Tonight Show and any of the talk shows that are based out of Los Angeles, the local touring places like Tour Supply, for example, that do that, there's a couple that have a contract with NBC Studios that they are the go-to supplier of loan gear for artists on the show. So if we want to have gear for our artist on the Tonight Show, we have to give it to Tour Supply or whoever the contractor is, I forget. And then they supply it to the show. They deliver it, they pick it up, they charge for it or they don't, whatever. And then they bring it back and we get it from them. And that works out really well. We've done that with a bunch of artists where this sort of, how come when those guys are in LA, it's like all Fryette, but every place else it's Marshall? Well, because we don't have 8 cabs in Germany or Switzerland or Spain or Italy, just laying around a storage facility someplace. Right. And so that's a big expense. But again, we didn't really start out that way, and we didn't really market ourselves that way. We never been a real high profile marketer because our product always sort of sold itself based on its sound and its quality. So
Right.
So, and because it was mostly power amps, it was just kind of assumed to be sort of like a utility thing. But then it became really big at a certain point. It just like it went over the top. One of the ways that it went over the top was our great friend God, right on the tip of my tongue until I have to say his name out loud, and then boom. Living Color. Vernon Reid goes on the Tonight Show with his rack that had a red 2150 power amp in it. And when he's doing the solo, the camera angle is such that right in the V of his arm is the front panel of a 2150 power amp in red while he's soloing. And boy, did the phones ring off the hook the next day.
Really? That's so cool.
Everywhere. We got calls from Tokyo. We got calls from Switzerland. We got calls from Finland, Germany, all over the place. He really just blew a hole in. And
do
of course,
you remember
we didn't have a marketing budget to back up anything like that. So, but that was a big, huge thing.
Well, do you remember what year was this? Probably 4 years ago when I sent you that picture of Vernon.
Mm-hmm.
When guys, just like an incredible stroke of luck. I was in Woodstock and wound up having lunch with Vernon, and we wound up talking about Steve and what I'm talking about. I should probably find it on my phone, but I actually wrote it out on a napkin. Hi, Steve. I was like, hold this up so I can take a picture of it and send it to Steve, because we were talking about you and talking about your gear. And actually talking about the next time he was in LA coming through the shop. So anyhow, Vernon. So
we worked with one band that was using our stuff, and the guitar tech for that band got a job as artist relations rep at Mesa.
Oh, really?
And the band was really hot, and they were selling records, and they were in between tours. And so he knew somebody at Mesa, and he's just like, hey, I'm in between tours. You got anything I can do? And they said, hey, maybe you can do artist relations. So they hired him as an artist relations rep. All of a sudden, that artist is like a Mesa artist. So it wasn't really the artist that did that so much. It was the guitar tech guy that went and engineered this whole switch over. And we've been in situations like that where the artist was told, hey, Fryette doesn't want to deal with you anymore. You know, like, what? What did I do? I don't know. The guy's really a jerk. You know, we just don't want to deal with them, and they don't want to deal with us. And screw that. We can get all the Mesa we need, and blah, blah, blah. So there's all the little things that go on behind the scenes that, and I don't want to make it like sour grapes. It's just the nature of the business. Yeah. So we don't really get all caught up in that. We don't throw a lot of money at marketing. We just make the best product that we can make and get it out there. And it goes in waves. So we have a big thing when power amps are king, and then when the Deliverance came out, that took off, and then there was a little bit of a lull, and then when the Sig X came out, that was like one of our top selling amps. To this day, is one of our top selling big heads, and now it's power station. So we go in these waves, and we don't grow to this outsize sort of our own ability to manage.
Well, that's my next kind of sub question here, coming from Mark up here. He asks, I guess the question is Fryette and Sound City intentionally smaller, or would you prefer to be Marshall scale? And what I would ask is, or just comment on, is your job would change drastically if you became much larger. And I wonder if maybe even, I don't know, maybe it's completely conscious, or maybe in the back of your mind, you're kind of like, I like it kind of where it's at, where I have a smaller team. I have my fingers in all of these, different pieces of the pie. And, rather than becoming executive Steve,
Yeah, it would be, if we were going to grow exponentially, say we were going to get investors and really grow the thing. The first thing that I would say is, we need to bring in a CEO. I'm not that guy.
Mhm.
We need to bring in a CFO. I'm not that guy.
Mhm.
We have really good people at our company that can manage it at the scale that it's at, and probably larger, a little larger.
Mhm.
You know, we need to maybe bring in one or two more administrative staff people to manage the additional sort of day-to-day action, but we could manage that.
Yeah.
And we can sort of grow incrementally like we're doing, and we have been, and understanding where to put those resources and where not to blow resources. We
Yeah.
understand all that stuff, but if we were going to grow exponentially, then there would have to be a mechanism put in place where I step back and go into my white tower, which I would personally love to do. That would be great. I would be happy to do that. But the other side of it is, a lot of what Marshall is doing right now, as far as amplifiers, is kind of visual. It's not their main thing. You go to Best Buy and you see, Marshall USB.
Yeah, it's almost like they're branching into the lifestyle market. It's not
They're
just
not branching into the lifestyle market. They're like going headlong into the lifestyle market. Headphones, Bluetooth speakers, recording software, all this stuff. The current CEO is steering them all that direction. They're still making a few amps here and there to keep up the image, but it's not anywhere near their main thing.
yeah.
And I actually saw some video. A friend of mine went to England and he took a tour of Marshall and he took some shots of the factory. And there was like two guys in the amp department. One guy was building a cab, the other guy was wiring an amp chassis. And he was like, "Oh, so is all your staff out to lunch?" He was like, "No, this is our staff for building the amps."
That is not even what. That is really bizarre. Well, so we could
that might have
go
been
on
at
and
that
on.
particular time, and I don't know what they're doing now. But I mean, their thing is obviously a whole different dynamic now than it ever was.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then, and Fender's getting much more lifestyle oriented. I saw that you saw this with Harley in the 90s.
Mhm.
They went from motorcycles to swag, Harley diapers, Harley sexy underwear, I mean, and early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I think it was late 80s when Harley did that leveraged buyout. They the employees of the company bought Harley away from AMF, who had purchased them in the 70s and did a terrible job with them. So the employee, rather than sell off the assets and close the thing down, the employees bought it back in an LBO, which was the big thing in the late 80s. And
that's a Fender from CBS maneuver too.
that's what Fender did. They did an LBO to get it away from CBS and reestablished it. At that time, Fender was a little office in Arizona or something like that with two people there, and they were having the guitars made by ESP in Japan. So these kind of things happen all the time. And I was a Harley rider, and I was at the dealership, and I read the news on the Harley newsletter and blah blah blah, and you could send away for a stock prospectus to see if you just see, So I had them send me a stock prospectus because I wanted to see if I wanted to just buy some Harley shares. And I looked at it, and their primary source of income was making dummy bombs for military test maneuvers, fake bombs to train people how to drop bombs in the military. That was their top money-making thing that they did.
I've never heard this before.
It started with empty bomb casings that were used for practice strafing and training military personnel.
Yeah.
So they had a military contract. So that was their primary source of income. And then the next source of the income was swag.
Yeah.
Baby diapers, the tank tops, the gloves, the blah, blah, blah. The next tier down was parts and accessories. And the bottom of the rung, The bottom rung of the ladder of Harley's income was making motorcycles.
Wow.
Their
That's
least
so
profitable part of their whole organization.
Huh.
But it's the motorcycles that, if they stop making the motorcycles, who's going to buy their?
Well, yeah, that's the driver.
Panty,
that's
right?
the driver.
That's
that has to be there. But it's a publicly traded company, so therefore they need to continue their growth, and then the lifestyle products and whatever. So look, we could talk about that for an entire show. Yeah. But I'm going to ask you another question.
Right.
It's going to be a short one.
Great.
This is from our buddy BJ, and he says he's wondered for many years, what the hell does VHT stand for?
When I started the company, I didn't know what the company was going to be called, but I knew that I didn't want to put my name on it because I was kind of paranoid about that. I just didn't think that it made any sense at the time.
It was going to make sense later.
I thought it should be something cool that when you said it, it sounded cool and rolled off the tongue. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think my name was that. So I had been thinking about how I was going to create an image for a brand. And I was a Talking Heads fan, and David Byrne did an interview where he talked about songwriting and how he got himself out of a writer's block. And he said, well, sometimes I would just cut words out of a magazine and throw them up in the air and then rearrange. Yeah. And I thought, that's brilliant, so I did that only with letters. I thought, I wanted something like SVT. I thought that sounded cool.
Yeah.
So I did that with letters, and I came up with VHT. So VHT started out as just a random act of putting letters together.
Then it needed to make sense later.
That makes sense. It needed to roll off the tongue, and I talked to some friends in different countries that had different accents and asked them to say VHT.
Oh, smart.
And see how it sounded when they said it. It's kind of funny. In Germany, they all said VHT. And but I thought that was okay. And anyway, so I did that, and then I created the graphic for the logo, and I'm not a graphic designer, right? So I created the VHT logo the way you see it, and I just thought, oh, this looks really good. Of course, like a couple of graphic designer people said, oh, wow, you got the lighting all wrong. On the V, the light is coming here, and on the T, the lighting is over here. And like, that's not the way it works. And I'm like going, I don't care. It looks right to me. So I went with that. And then as soon as we came out, it started right up. What does VHT stand for? And I'm like, okay. I don't want to say it stands for nothing, because then if I say it stands for nothing, that's like denigrating the brand.
Yeah, that's a little bit. Yeah,
that's the wrong message. So I just came up with 3 or 4 stories to tell people in different circumstances. If it was at a bar and we're all drinking, what does VHT stand for? There was a comic book called the underground comics, the 60s underground comics, Mr. Natural and all of these all the graphic arts, like on the first Big Brother and the Holding Company live album.
Art, something
art kind of vibe.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So one of those comics had a gang, had a motorcycle gang that were like the Hells Angels or something. Mm-hmm. And they had all their girlfriends were like these big butt, big breasted, big girls on the back of motorcycles. And they were called the Hog Tramps. And so when people in a party environment, when people would say, what did VHT stand for? I'd say voluptuous hog tramps. In really close circles of friends, it was Valley Heroin Transport. And
I love that one.
And it just right. There wasn't really a good answer.
That's the official answer. That's great.
Yeah, the official answer is that there's no official answer.
All right. I'm going to ask you another question.
All right.
That's my job this evening. So this is from our buddy Tyler. He says, "Hi guys, any opinions about analog cab emulation, like the GPDI versus IRs? Maybe it's subjective. Hope this isn't redundant." Oh yeah, especially. I mean, this is actually really
it's relevant.
It is with the PLIR being imminent. So go ahead and talk, Steve.
Well, because of the popularity of IRs, it's automatically presumed that the analog cab sim is obsolete because the IR does it correctly. Why do you need these clunky filters?
And IRs are great.
The IRs include the microphone and the convolutions that happen between the microphone capsule and the cone of the speaker at whatever angle, at whatever distance, different reflections, different time of reflections, and
the little phasing stuff.
And phasing. It's all about frequency and time. And so you can't it's totally impractical to try to emulate all of that stuff in the analog domain. It's very easy to do in the digital domain. So the problem is that IRs include the microphone and all of those relevant convolutions. Now, when you're sitting in front of an amplifier in a recording studio and playing your guitar and dialing in your sound and, okay, I think I got it, you go, okay, that's the sound. I got it nailed, blah, blah, blah. And then you go into the control room and you listen to it back on monitors and then you hear that. Okay, when you're sitting in front of the amp, what you hear is what the analog cab sim sounds like. The sound of the amp shaped by the behavior and sound of the speakers. When you go into the control room, you hear what an IR does, which is the microphone in front of the speaker, close mic'd, and maybe there's another mic in the room picking up the room, and that's mixed together and coming out of the monitors. You're hearing what the IR does, emulates the miking of said speaker and its relationship, which is a completely different sonic experience. So when you walk out of the studio into the control room, you hear all the phasing and you hear all the weirdness, and you try to hear past that at first because it's foreign sounding until you're sitting in the studio control room for about 20 minutes or so, and then your brain sort of gets accustomed to it and works it all out. And then you're back to being familiar with it again until you go back into the studio and sit in front of your amp, and then you hear it that way again. What your ears do, there's a whole article, if you really want to read about this, I did a whole article about it on Premier Guitar Magazine. So you can search my articles there a couple of years ago. But basically, when you're in any environment, part of how you know where you are in a space is by what you hear in that environment. You ever see these things where blind guys are riding bicycles down the street and not running into trees and cars because they're doing this, or they're making sounds.
They're using their sonar.
Yeah, they're using their sonar. They're creating a sound, and they're listening to the reflection, and they're navigating off of that. It's just amazing that they can do that.
Unbelievable.
That's what they do. And what they're not doing something that genius. What they're doing is what we all do, but they have to do it externally, where we do it internally. We're like bats. We listen to the sounds. We know that we're standing up straight. We know that up, is down and down, and left is right, and right is left is left, and right is right.
Yeah, speak for yourself.
And so we know where we are. We know if we're in a big room. We know if we're in a small room. And we know where in the room we are. We know if we're in the center or in the corner. We just know. You could be blindfolded and you can tell where you are in a room once you get used to being able to navigate around a room like that. When you listen to the amplifier that you're standing in front of, you don't hear just the sound that's coming out of the amp into your face. You hear all the reflections out of the room that tells you how far you are from the amp, what you're hearing out of the amp, what you're hearing out of the room that places you in where you are in front of that amp and how far away. And that's how and then you make an objective decision that that's what you want it to sound like based on how loud you're playing, where you're standing, and how you have the controls set. And then when you go in another room, it's an entirely different reality. So what the PLIR does is it combines the analog cab sim and IR as two separate outputs. So you have the option of being in the control room or being in the studio or both simultaneously. And you could pan them, you can mix them, and there will be phasing issues, but hey, everything has phasing issues these days. A phasing anomaly can be a new sound. There's no rule that you're breaking by having phase anomalies.
Right.
They may annoy you, and you may change the relationship between those two signals by panning them differently or making the levels slightly different. But all you're doing is changing the phase relationship. You're not eliminating it. You're just changing it so you like it. So that's why I love the fact that everybody has abandoned analog cab sims. They just sort of left it to us to go, oh, wait a minute. No. So we expanded on the analog cab sim and made it adjustable, made the low mids and the up and the high mids adjustable. So you could actually shape the upper mids and the low mids of the speaker. And so when you feed a reactive load, an amp into a reactive load, the reactive load emulates the behavior of the amp plugged into a speaker, and then you feed that into an analog cab sim and simultaneously an IR. So you get the feel and the attack response mechanism out of both of them. So it's familiar out of both outputs, but one of them is with a mic and whatever mic you select and at whatever distance or angle that you select it. And the analog cab sim out of whatever speaker you dial the speaker to sound like. It could be more like a vintage sounding speaker with a more bumped mid, or a more modern sounding speaker with a more scooped mid. And that's why we kept the analog cab sim, and why we think it's not only relevant, it's more than relevant, because you'll find that when you're playing clean, the analog cab sim works better. So we have a lot of different kinds of people using the existing power load right now. And with the existing power load, you can run a line out and use IRs in your DAW. So you can do that same thing.
I do that all day long. Yeah.
With the GPDI, with the power load. You can do that same thing now. It's the only difference with that and the PLIR is it's all in one box, but you can experience that. And a lot of people will tell you, I forgot which one I was using. I thought I was using the IR, but I was using the analog sim, and I was totally like all dialed into it. And it only bothers me when I switch. And that's what I was saying before about being in the control and being in the studio. It only bothers you when, and it's a drastic change, when you encounter this drastic change, and then you have to get acclimated to it.
Right. And I'd have to say, for me, I look at it like, when I hear the debate between, say, analog amplification versus modelers, and I just kind of look, I see it kind of all as, horses for courses sort of thing. What, did you press something here?
Yeah. What did I do? Sorry.
Anyway, I actually thought when you were showing me the new PLIR, to be honest, I sort of thought, man, you might have your ladder up against the wrong wall, like keeping up this thing with the analog cab sim. You know, I didn't use it, whatever. And then you had them, you know, split running into the mixer, and I'll be damned. Like, I thought I don't want to have this box without the analog cab sim. Even if I don't use it all the time, it's like an entirely different tool that I can blend in. And it's so, like, to me, it's so different from the experience of playing, you know, through IRs or, you know, my traditional, you know, just miking up a cab. That you know, like a good example to me was I think we were talking a number of shows back about using the old Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to use that thing for particular types of tracks, and I would seek it out for things that my amplifiers could not do.
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was like, no, I don't want this typical amp sound. Like, yeah, I know how to get that. But this Palmer does this really weird thing that cuts in a particular way that really works well. And that was my experience when I was playing through the new PLIR, when we dialed up and we're mixing and matching IR stuff with the analog cab sim. And I thought, this is ideal to have them both.
And one little additional thing, then we can jump on to the next, is that John Garmus mentions the Celestion IRs sound good. Sure. However, when you have the analog cab sim, two things are now at your fingertips that you didn't have before. The ability to fine tune the behavior of the speaker so it almost doesn't even matter which IR you are using, because you can have 50 different Celestion Vintage 30 IRs and all of them sound different because they're recorded under different circumstances, at different volumes, with different microphones, at different distances, and so on and so on and so on. So you can have 100 different Celestion IRs, and every one of them will have a slightly different characteristic. And you'll like one of them over the other one for a particular reason. And that's all personal and subjective.
Yeah.
But what you don't get away from is the latency. With the analog cab sim, there is zero latency. So now
that's true.
Now what you do is when you play both of them together, you get the immediate pick attack response feedback because there's no latency. And because you can dial the analog cab sim just sort of randomly, you're not really trying to make it sound like a Vintage 30 or a Greenback or a Fane F70 or whatever. You're just trying to make it sound right to you. So when you blend that with whatever the IR is, whether it's a Celestion or a Fane or a JBL or whatever, it's almost irrelevant. It doesn't matter which IR it is, because what is really salient about the IR is that convolution, the microphone interaction, that little hollow sort of thing that recording and miking up close does. When you mix that together with an analog cab sim that you can tweak, it could be any IR. The important thing is you blend them together so that it gives you all the elements that you want, and then when you play, you get the benefit of the IR without the latency. So, and then when you pan them, it just sounds huge. Now this just sounds so big. I'm just going to sit here and just play my guitar for an hour.
Yeah, you don't want to go back to one.
And what do you do when you're inspired and not gassing out about what the gear is not quite giving you? You start creating music, and that's the goal.
Right. And you know, one last thought about that with each one of these modes or modalities having their own usage or feel or sound is none of the IRs, and I have a buttload, none of them sound like my stupid 57 on my cab through my mic pre in my room. Like that's a whole other thing too. So in a way, it's kind of like, yeah, I want to use IR for this track. I want to mic my amp for this. I want to dial in, use some of that analog cab sim for this. And it becomes, you're kind of making a soup, and you don't have to say, this one dominant ingredient is the only one that belongs in the soup.
Yeah, you can go buy the little package of Celestion Vintage 30 mix and mix it with water and boil it for 15 minutes, and there's soup. Or little salt, a little pepper.
Right.
Not quite so much cumin this time.
Right. All right. Want another question?
Yeah.
All right. Steve, this is from our friend Brian. He asks, do you think flying leads make more sense with stomp switches?
You skipped Grum.
Yeah, because that's a little
Okay.
Well, you want to talk about that one?
Well, you already asked.
Okay. All right.
Flying leads. Flying leads, anytime that you're not PCB mounting a component on a board, you're making a concession for some reason or another. It could be cost. It could be the number of parts that you want to have in inventory. It could be you're not all that, maybe a limited ability in PCB design layout. A lot of things. So why would you put flying leads in a pedal from a switch to a circuit board if you have a circuit board in there? It could be because the board is mounted in the box this way, but the switch is on an angle this way, and so you can't do that. But you might put the switch on a board and then have a connector plug going from one board to the other board. Well, that's flying leads also, except that it's on connectors. So you just connect it. You don't have to sit there and solder each individual wire.
Okay.
Is there an advantage to soldering each individual wire if you use cheap connectors or unreliable connectors, or even just connectors over time? They might get oxidized. They might not. Generally, the better ones with the better contact material don't oxidize. Or if they do, they oxidize around the outside of the metal of the connectors, but not where the connector contacts meet. That's the gas tight area. And what I mean by gas tight is when metal is contacting metal under a certain amount of pressure, oxygen or any gas that could cause oxidation or tarnish or a reduction in the integrity of that connection could get in there and reduce that integrity. That's not a gas tight connection. So a gas tight connection gives you the integrity of the connection, and you can obtain that with connectors as well as just as soldering. It's just knowing what connector to use and making sure that you use a good quality one. So those are all subjective decisions that a designer makes for a lot of reasons. Maybe there's a bunch of connections on the switch, like those triple pole double throw switches that they have nine solder lugs on them. I mean, you want to sit there and solder 9 lugs? Ugh. Put them on a board, because you're going to reduce those 9 down to maybe 5 or 6 contact points anyway. But you have to tie some of those together to make it work. So to me, that's just asking for extra work. I'm lazy. I'm lazy, and I know how good boards work and how good boards get engineered to work reliably. Been doing it 32 years. And even so, connectors are bad because connectors go bad. Well, you name something inside an amplifier that doesn't go bad at one point or another that needs attention, and I'll show you an amp that has no connectors in it. Tubes go bad, sockets go bad, switches go bad, jacks go bad.
All right. There, you answered that one.
Okay.
So, all right, let's go back to Grum's question, and I'm going to try and decipher this here because this is a little tricky. He says he had a JCM 800 and Yamaha T50 heads. Okay, so I guess that's 2 heads.
Right.
And then he says a noisy Duncan distortion main pickup. Okay, so I'm assuming that's his rig. But then he says the PV is not bright enough without an EQ pedal. So I'm curious where the PV is coming from.
Right.
But then the question is, would the PS100 be brighter as a mono power amp?
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Okay, well, let's just take a slice at that and say maybe he's saying the Yamaha is not bright enough without an EQ pedal.
Okay.
And the Yamaha T50 is the Yamaha amp that Mike Soldano designed. So whenever you say something like it's not bright enough without an EQ, maybe you just don't like the treble behavior on that particular amp. I can't imagine a JCM 800.
That's got plenty of treble.
Yeah, I can't imagine having
In my
trouble
experience.
That being said, if you're used to the sound of the JCM 800 and you listen to the T50, the JCM 800 would definitely be brighter. And if you're trying to get the T50 to be that bright, yeah, you'd probably need EQ to accomplish that.
Oh, yeah.
But
Maybe
now,
that's
where do you bring in the PS100? Are you saying if I take those two different heads and put them into PS100, would that be brighter? I'm guessing if you're asking if using those amps with the PS100 would allow you to add some shimmer to the sound of things, yeah, that's kind of like the point of the power station, is that it can be transparent. It can reproduce the sound exactly as you heard it from the amp directly into the speaker, only slightly reduced, and you can dial it in to make sure that it does that. Or you can use the power station to be intentionally non-transparent and amp out the top, amp out the bottom, force the amp to saturate more so that it's more mid-focused and roll off the top and bottom. You can do all of that stuff with the power station. By itself, is it just intrinsically a brighter amplifier? As far as the amplifier part of the PS100 or the PS2 for that matter, no, they're very sort of linear unless you force them to be non-linear by jacking up the presence and depth controls. And if you're using it as intended with the amp plugged into the amp in, using the reactive load controls to accentuate the top and bottom.
Right.
So the answer is
great.
Yeah, very likely you could do that, or you could choose not to do that. It's up to you.
Great. Okay. Let's move on. Corey Johnston asks, I've been pushing my PS1 in self-attenuation mode fairly regularly. What can we expect as far as tube life, and how can I tell if they are due to be replaced?
Tubes amplify, and running the tubes into distortion is not running them harder. When you run an amplifier into distortion, what you're doing is sending enough signal to the tube so that it amplifies more and more and more until there's no power supply left to support increasing the volume when you increase the input to the tube. So the tube's job is to extract power out of the power supply and convert it to volume. So once you get up to the maximum ability of the power amp's power supply to produce more volume, then sending more signal to the power tubes to make more volume doesn't do anything. It just causes compression. So that in itself doesn't wear out power tubes. It doesn't necessarily even mean that they run hotter. The main thing, and I've been saying this my whole life of being involved in amplifiers and having observed that, is the main thing that causes tubes to really deplete is vibration.
I was going to say drunk people running into the back of the amp with their beer.
Yeah. Putting your amp on your 412 cab with casters and rolling it across the street to your car. Right. And of course, the concrete is really rough. Yeah, that'll do more. Just one trip across the street will do more damage to the power tubes than 4 hours of cranking the amp at full volume. It's the vibration, especially in combos. It's the vibration that kills power tubes because it shakes them. And power tubes have very tight, they're delicate, and they have very tight tolerances between the individual components. And when you shake those around, they loosen up. And if they loosen up enough, they can touch each other and short out. It's
All right.
vibration that does it, not just using them. The tubes will tell you when they're starting to wear. Now they can lose transconductance over time if they're getting a buildup of gas, or if the tube isn't built that well and you run them really hot, the heat will cause the components inside the tube to warp a little bit and change their relationship to each other, and that can reduce the transconductance of the tube, because the grid, there's grids in there. There's 2 grids that are overlapping 3, and they all have to line up so that the electrons can flow through them. And if those grids get out of alignment, the tube transconductance goes down. Why would they get out of alignment? If they get way too hot and they're not built that well in the first place, and they deform, and that can cause them to go out of alignment, and that will make the tube sound a little anemic and soft on the top or weak on the bottom. You would hear that with certain kinds of tubes. Other kinds of tubes, they just work and work and work and work and work until they short out and you blow a fuse, or you just get tired of the amp and buy another one and move on.
So if Corey's sitting around at home, I'm assuming if he's running it in self-attenuation mode, that's kind of a studio environment, staying at home, he's safe for a long time, especially with the stock tubes that you ship the unit with.
Knock your damn self out.
Love it. Cheers. Oh, you drank anyway, Steve. That was a cheers, dude. Everyone? Bing.
Knock your damn self out. I'm a strong proponent of milking tubes. Don't change them every 2 years. I mean, when you're touring, yeah, you just sort of do that for insurance or something like that. But just for the typical use, a lot of people, you just milk them until they're saying, "Please change me," then change them.
Yeah,
they're not like strings. You don't arbitrarily change them just because, unless you're really OCD like I am, and then maybe you will. But it's not necessary.
Okay, let's see. Okay, actually, I'm really sad here because I lost some of the chat here on StreamYard. There was a question really early. There were a couple questions really early on, guys. One was about some sort of a Sound City fuzz that had been rumored. Steve, does that mean anything to you?
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that? Even though
when I did my Scott, lobotomy, that's Uzo. Yeah, I've done that. Been there, done that.
By the way, Scott, we have a great question from you coming up in a moment that you probably don't even remember you typed, but get ready.
Probably when I was on my Hendrix Ant ramp a couple of weeks ago.
Do you know what you just said? Your Hendrix Ant ramp. That's a good drink. Cheers.
And to exercise those demons, I did my little machine gun video.
Oh man, yeah.
Where I grabbed whatever I had laying around to sort of get in the realm of that sound. And one of my buddies who's a real vibe freak, he's got like 4 or 5 different Univibe clones, and he's like, "Which one are you going to use?" I go, "Whichever one is at the top of the box when I open the box." And it just happened.
So do you remember which one you used? You don't even remember?
Yeah, I used the Voodoo Lab Microvibe.
Oh, yeah. You know what? That doesn't sound anything like a traditional Univibe, but it sounds freaking awesome for what it is. I love that pedal. It's so good.
And when I first plugged it in, I was going, when I first got it, I hadn't played a Univibe forever. And I went, "Oh, this works for me."
Uh-huh.
And then after my Univibe freak collector friend started showing me 4 or 5 different Univibes, I started reacclimating myself to the Univibe vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't say that because I was drunk. I said that because I meant to say that. And so when I plugged in the Microvibe, I went, "Oh, wow, that's like really kind of over the top, But then I went, "So often what? I started playing the riff, and there it was, and it had that churning thing. The really salient thing about it wasn't how accurately it did a univibe. The salient thing was that that was coming out of it. And okay, so I need something approximating a fuzz phase. What do I got laying around? Well, I years ago, the Sound City pedals, prototype pedals, I brought to NAMM. There was a boost, and there was sort of a kind of a fuzz phase based design in there called the Black Fuzz, and it was laying in the box too. Will we get around to it eventually? Yeah, but not right at the moment. So I had this Black Fuzz prototype, and it just, again, this not a perfect sounding fuzz face. I'm not shooting for that. There's a million of them out there. I'm not trying to get into that space. I have no interest in getting into that space. What I'm interested in is the character that you can achieve with the kind of fuzz that when you turn the guitar volume down, it just cleans up really beautifully.
Yeah.
It just has that little bit of zizz on the top of it.
Yep. That's not even chime.
Not chime. It's musical, but it's unobtrusive. It's just there, and it's fine. But then when you pull up on the guitar volume, it goes, and that's all I needed it to do. And the Univibe thing, the washing machine on doing, I just needed the washing machine sound and the clean to the sound. I needed those two sounds. That's all I needed.
I'm pleasantly surprised that you used that microvibe. I had that on my pedal board, my live pedal board, for years, because it's actually like a more strident univibe sound than more of the traditional kind of copies and even the originals. So, when you're A-Bing them, you're like, yeah, this thing's kind of over the top. But actually, sometimes maybe you want that when you really want it to be univibey. And are
you aware that there's a trim potty inside that you can adjust that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I opened mine up and I just gacked it all the way up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a great pedal. Hey, I'm seeing
that's
here.
What I didn't want. I was like, when I got that and I plugged it in, I started playing through it. This is pretty nice, but I'm not looking for subtlety. I'm looking for. That was a long time ago. I did that, and I talked to Josh, and I said, how can I make this a little more intense? He goes, well, you can open up the box and turn up the. I said, oh, you mean I had to read the manual? Oh, crap. So I opened it up. There's the trim pot. I just turned it all the way up and I plugged it in. I went, yeah, that's what I needed.
More is more.
I grabbed the Strat, that reverse Strat, the made in Mexico white Hendrix Strat that Fender came out with a couple of years ago, which is great, by the way. Plays great. It's like $600-700 or something like that. Plays great, sounds great. I use it at the shop all the time for testing. So I did that, plugged into the Black Fuzz Proto, into the Microvibe, into the Sound City amp, set it sort of kind of clean into the 212 cab, and I went, I wonder if this will get me close enough to get my point across. Yeah, I did. Put it on the iPhone, listen to it. Yeah, close enough for jazz, good enough just to get it off my chest. I got it off my chest, done with it. And we got more hits on that video. People were like blown away, and I'm like, I was so not trying to blow anybody.
I have to say, when you sent it to me, I went, oh, because that, I'm just gonna say it, Machine Gun to me is kind of like one of those things. Like, don't do that. Don't play it. Just don't. Like, I personally wouldn't, because I wouldn't do it justice. But you sent it over, let's do it, and I was like, I'll be damned, this is awesome. Because you copped that thing way better than I ever could, and I loved it. And then even a couple days later, I pulled it up on my phone, like it was just in my in my phone videos, and I didn't know what it was. I was like, what the hell? This sounds awesome. It's like Machine Gun. And I was like, oh yeah, it was Steve.
Why did Hendrix write that song?
Why did he write it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was a
Just speculate.
It was a war protest song.
It was, and he was in the military for a period of time.
and proud of that.
And proud of it. And he had buddies that were there, over there, and it was close to his heart. And he was probably sad and angry that that was still going on, and that soldiers there in general and the public was so upside down, upset about it, and was tearing the country apart, and it was affecting him deep in his soul. And that was his reaction to it. It wasn't just a song about Vietnam. It was coming out of here. It was demanding to get out. And so when it came out, you felt the impact of it, right? When I did that little bit, it wasn't, I'm going to try to emulate that sound. People are being sold a motherfucking bill of goods. Damn it, blah, 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 blah. It's not about that. It's about, It was like a different kind of angst, a different kind of, I'll show those MFers what it's really about, even if I mess it up and slop it up. This is what
sounded great on it, man. It's just,
and I think that
it's one
when
of
I
those
look
things.
back, I go, yeah, I can hear that. It's a good thing there wasn't anybody in the room with me, because I probably would have swung the guitar at their head if they'd have said anything I didn't like, you know.
Oh yeah.
I was just,
well, actually, Steve, that's the mindset that you should be in if you play that song. To be perfectly honest,
that's my point.
If you're sitting there going, listen to my Hendrix tone, no, go away, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm looking at the comments, guys. Just real quick, I can answer this one. Jeremy, you asked what effects I use in my YouTube videos. That's really simple. Everything that you hear me do, this is going to sound like a total plug, but every single thing that I record for the last, since it came out, is the GPDI. And then Bear, you're right. I use the Strymon Dig. I don't know what you call it. It's just that one pedal straight into my interface, and then I use a couple IRs within the box. So if you're talking about like tone, it's really coming from the GPDI. That's the guitar tone, and then the effect thing is probably 80% that Strymon pedal. And yeah, it's the golden ratio setting, which what that means is there's 2 delay lines in that particular pedal, and I don't even know how to describe it, but they overlap in such a way in that golden ratio mode that it's really hard to discern whether or not it's a reverb or a delay, which I love. It's kind of confusing, but it creates the space. And Bear, actually, I use it on like the soloing, like dirt tones as well as the clean, unless I'm doing something completely dry. The only other thing that I'll do is there's a Lexicon 280. Is it the 280 or 240? Let's see how good I am with this stuff. There's a UAD plug-in emulator of that reverb unit, and I'll use just a preset in there to add some reverb to kind of space it out. So that's pretty much what I'm doing in those videos, but thanks for the compliment. So there, another one down. Let's answer another question. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, like I was saying, from Scott. Scott asks, why does it hurt when I pee?
That's an excellent question.
It is an excellent question.
I know why it hurts when I pee. Just from personal experience, I can tell you.
Okay. I'd love to know the answer.
When I've been stepping on my dick, you know, that's usually causes that.
Cheers again.
And I do that frequently, so I'm very familiar with that.
That's a daily practice for me.
With that dynamic, and as probably all of our wonderful malcontents could probably attest, because we do it so frequently.
Ba-dum-bum.
By the way, the end of the foot switch video where you did the metal version of that was just so awesome.
Oh, the thing I just sang.
I play that just to hear that. I think it goes by people because the video goes by so quick. So go back to the PS100 foot switch commercial video that Joe did last week, where it's really a goofy, stupid video, intentionally really so. But just listen to the last 1.5 seconds. It's just pure bliss.
I was like, we need to tie this up. It needs something at the end, like a dun 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 kind of thing. And I was like, oh, I'll just do that with my 7th string.
It was just dynamite. It's perfect.
BJ asks, let's see, I'll ask from my layman's framework of understanding as a guitar player seeking to dial in specific tones. I noticed the effects loop of the VHT Ultra Lead has a high and low button for the effects loop level. And I see a similar approach to the Fryette PS2. Though the levels of adjustment in the chosen pedal controls and the features of the PS2, I can place the effect into my sound with the desired clarity, an amount of given effect and low noise floor.
Yeah, there's basically there are 2 ranges that generally work in an effects loop. Now, when you have an effects loop in an amplifier, what you're doing is you're conditioning the signal to leave the amplifier and then hopefully come back into the amplifier relatively intact and useful to go on to the next stage. And some devices that you're going to plug into the loop can handle a hotter signal level, and some won't. So what people think of as the most useful kind of effects loop is having adjustable send and return levels, so that you can really dial in the send level to the perfect point for one particular device, and then compensate the return level to give you back the exact same amount of signal that left the amp. The reality of that is you never get them right. You never get the send and the return perfectly balanced. And if you did, after spending a half an hour doing it with an A/B switch, turning it on and off, is it perfect? Is it perfect? Is it perfect? And then you get to the gig, it's not perfect, because the volume that you're playing at is different. And if you're playing at a different volume, you'd probably change the relationship of the send and return level. Or you hit it when you were taking it out of the trunk of your car and moved the pot and you don't remember where it was. Or somebody helping you setting up your rig moved it, or said, oh, what is this knob for? And changed it. Or any number of things can go wrong with adjustable send and return levels, which I learned when I first started doing effects loops and did when I was doing mods, and I put send and return levels. And I eventually learned that was a huge PITA. So I decided that there should be an optimum level. And then when I realized that there's an optimum level for rack kind of stuff, and then there's a different optimum level for pedal kind of stuff, that those would have to be both accounted for. So therein is the high-low. So when it's in the low mode, that means low loop level. And what that means is that the level coming out of the send is compatible with small guitar pedal devices.
Yeah.
That are generally designed to work well when you plug the guitar directly into them. So minus 10, minus 20 dB. And that means the corresponding return has to be 10 times hotter to recover all of that signal level. So in that scenario, what the most important thing that you're trying to do is derive the effect. And it's not necessarily the best from a signal to noise ratio, because in applying a lot of gain to return the signal back to its normal level, you might be amplifying some inherent noise in the pedal if it's a noisy pedal. So we get this, I use my pedal in your loop and it's really noisy. Well, you got a noisy pedal.
Yeah.
When I switch it to the other position, it gets really quiet, but then it sounds compressed because you ran hotter level through it and it can't process that much level. So the only real solution there is either just turn, if you've got an amp that's got a master volume after the loop and preamp volume before the loop, you would want to turn the preamp level down in the high mode and the master volume up to sort of ease off on the level in the loop, or do the opposite if you want to use the low level but get a little more signal into the pedal and then not have to amplify so much coming back out. So on our amps that have effects loops, they also have channel volumes and often a global master volume. So with those, you can set up the optimum detailed send and return level. But in the loop itself, high, low. That makes sure that the amount of signal coming out of the send is exactly compensated by the amount of application in the return, or vice versa in the low level. High level, low level. In the power station, it's a whole different dynamic, because in the amps, we need a buffer going out and a return gain stage coming back in. And we need a buffer because we need to isolate the signal coming out of the preamp from the load of the pedal. And we need to often change the impedance to a very low impedance so that you can run a long length of cable from the amp to the pedal and back. And so the reason for having buffers in an amplifier loop is to compensate for those things, so that by using the loop, you're not degrading the performance of the amp. And that's the problem with a lot of loops out there on the market, amps that have loops, is they don't really pay much or any attention to the impedance of the send and return stages. And you run into high frequency problems where the top end changes, the low end changes, or the noise becomes excessive, or all these kinds of things. And they behave differently with every effect. So generally, the lower impedance the loop is, the more immunized the amp becomes from the various different pedals that you might use in the loop. So that's why it's really important to carefully design the buffer, the send buffer, and the return gain stage in an active loop in an amplifier. In a product like the Power Station, it's a little bit different of a ball game, because when you plug your head into the amp and it goes into the reactive load drives the effects loop. And the reactive load is a very low impedance to start with. So it doesn't need a buffer to isolate itself from the effects of external devices, because it's inherently low impedance. And because it doesn't require a buffer, there isn't any way to overload the signal between the output of the reactive load and the send jack. There's no active electronics in there to overload, so you can't overload it and it doesn't add noise. Same thing coming back in. The power amplifier gain is what serves as the return gain of the loop. So again, there's no additional return gain stage needed in there, because the power amp has enough gain to compensate for whatever level was dropped going out. And so that doesn't need a gain stage. It doesn't need a buffer. And therefore, there is no additional active gain stage to potentially overload or add noise. And that's why the loop in the Power Station is so quiet and transparent, because it doesn't need any of that extra stuff to accomplish its purpose. Okay.
Awesome. Guys, I'm just, I'm busting up over here laughing at your possible interpretations of the meaning of VHT. Very hot transformer. Very hung tone master.
Yeah.
Van Halen time.
I've heard every one of them.
Very hot valves. Very helmet tone. Vixens having
tone.
sex.
We've heard them all. Trust me.
These are making me happy.
Okay, good.
I haven't heard any of them.
I think my all-time favorite was Valley Heroin Transport. That one actually made me roll on the floor the first time I heard it.
That's beautiful.
But yeah.
Steve, I don't know if this is a quick one. I want to grab this question from Simon up here, my man from Australia. He's when we were talking about the marketing stuff earlier, and you mentioned going through the period where the Sig X was a super massive seller, and Simon wanted to know why do you not make the Sig X anymore if it was such a great seller?
The Sig X came out in 2005, I think. 2005, 2006. It was a smash hit, and we shipped a huge amount of them. We literally shipped container loads of them. It was the most number of amplifiers we built in a month of any model ever up to that point.
You felt like Marshall for a moment.
Oh, it was. It would, to the point where we were struggling how to get the financing that we needed to ramp up the production to that point.
Wow.
Growing pains.
Wow.
And so we were dealing with that. And then the economy decided to go down the toilet.
Oh, yeah, that time.
Yeah. So that
really
put the kibosh on it. That thing was just a freight train that hit a brick wall when the economy tanked. And after that, we could not give away a 100-watt amp or a 412 cabinet.
Oh, so just in general, the big tools.
We had a large factory, and we were shipping pallet loads and pallet loads of 412 cabs. You would not believe how many 412 cabs we were shipping a month. It was like, I couldn't even believe it. Where are all these 412 cabinets going? We had a couple of bands touring that were using Deliverance cabs. I think Unearth had like 12 Deliverance 412 cabs on stage. I mean, it was smoking. And then it tanked. It stopped. Nobody could sell 412 cabinets. Nobody could sell big heads. And so that stopped dead for a long time. There was no market for it. Right about the time that happened, we were considering doing the next revision, which was some refinements. The first one came out, went out in the field, had some bug fixes that needed to be done, which we did, and all that. But in general, it was really a popular amp, and everybody was really excited about it. And then it stopped. And that's why. And then the big amp sales didn't actually start to recover again until very recently. So,
but now they're really recovering, right? I mean, now it's kind of crazy again. Everybody wants the big amps.
Yeah, now it's an email a day. When's the Ultra Lead coming back? When's the Sig X coming back? When? And it's phenomenal. It's amazing. We're shipping 412 cabs like there's nobody business. Again, we don't know where they're going, but I don't care. People are happy. They love them. And there's going to be more of that. So
I remember when I met you, that was kind of the word was kind of like, yeah, I don't know if we're ever going to do those again. Like, it was kind of like, this might be it.
That was the market at the time.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
And, we're like, yeah, there was no market.
Like that's dinosaur stuff. And now
we had a big facility to do all that processing, and all of a sudden we had a bunch of empty space. And if we'd have kept trying to pay rent on empty space, we would have gone out of business. So we bailed out of that building and got a different location that was smaller and wrote it out. And just coincidentally, we started selling little stuff, tools and problem-solving solutions and things like that could be easily done in a smaller environment, because we weren't trying to make room for 12 pallets of cabinets every month. And so we utilized that space very effectively. And now that we've learned how to do that, we can actually pound out 412 cabs in that same environment. Just, we're better planners now. We're better at everything than we were at the time. Yeah. We were just blindly slamming out amps as fast as we could. And there were a lot of times when that even at that point, we had more space than we really needed. So we've learned to fine tune our operations. So that
BMO.
Huh?
Okay, Steve. BMO. This is okay. Start making dummy bombs for the military.
Yeah,
It's
seriously. Yeah.
Guys, you're killing me with your VHT stuff. I have to stop myself from laughing.
There is no substitute for big iron. Absolutely. There's no substitute for big iron. I'm really a big proponent of that because it's a truism in amplifiers. There's a feel and a quality.
Mighty. Unless you want the feel and the sound of the smaller iron, which that happens too.
Yeah, and that's a different thing.
You know?
I
love it all. I love it all. But hey, when you want vicious hernia time, you need the big iron.
Yeah.
Or ventricular hernia time. No, teeth.
All right. Should we bang out some of these older ones and get them out of the way?
Hey, is that a super reverb behind you, Steve? No, I think that's a concert.
That's a 1964 Fender concert amp that my brother bought when he was 14 or 15. So that would have been about 66. It's a 64. I think he got it in 66, maybe 67. And then I bought it from him in 72, maybe 71 or 2 or 3. And I've had it ever since.
That's
my
too
pride
cool.
and joy.
And you have the cover for it too, right?
I have the cover for it.
That's so awesome.
It's a beautiful amp. It's really different than a super reverb. It's totally different. If you listen to this amp, just play a power chord through it, you'll understand the sound of all of our amps after that.
You know, for grins, I have a 68 super reverb here. It's early 68, I think early April of 68. So it's all blackface. We should bring it over to your place and we'll mic up that in the concert sometime and you can actually ABM. But
I was thinking about showing it off a little bit, but it needs to be reformed before I power it up. It hasn't been turned on for a long time. So what we'll do
that down the road.
We'll do that. We'll get your amp. We'll put it next to it. I'll do a little quick seminar on reforming capacitors, and we'll talk about the ubiquitous cap job and why it's good and bad, and that'll be the example. So we'll get into that. But
I love that. Okay, let's fire off. Let's get through some of these other questions.
Okay.
Brian Griffin asks. He says he runs a Revival Drive compact into a color box into Friedman's analog cab sim. A wonderful sound. Thoughts about well-executed FETs instead of tubes?
Well-executed. Well-executed compared to what? Poorly executed tubes? Average executed FETs?
Poorly executed
excellently
FETs.
Executed tube circuits? What?
Let's do poorly executed and cynically executed FETs instead of tubes.
Well, the thing is this is where people get their wires crossed because of the oversimplification of a concept. FETs do, in a sense, operate in a similar way to vacuum tubes.
Okay.
They are not exactly vacuum tube solid state equivalents. So, and how well executed an FET gain stage is compared to, let's just say, your 12AX7 triode of choice depends on what aspect of the behavior of the 12AX7 that you're comparing it to, you're trying to emulate.
Ooh.
Because it's not just everything.
So is that like
how does this well executed FET? Well, based on what? On at the point where it starts to distort, how much bias current it operates at, what's the equivalent plate voltage, the operating impedance, the low frequency roll off point. I mean, there's all kinds of things, and you have to optimize the circuit for some of those variables in order for the circuit to be applicable in a particular circumstance.
Okay.
So it depends if you're talking about the very first gain stage of an amp, or
right,
control driver where you're.
That's what I wondered.
Way there are so many variables, and honestly, there are lots of examples. You can Google it. There's lots of examples of guys that are like retired electronics engineer guys that just have fun with the kind of stuff, and they've made sort of analogs of tube gain stages using FETs, and they've sort of stepped through all the problem solving process of getting it to behave exactly the right way, and whether it behaves more like a pentode or a triode, and blah 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 blah. And there's just a plethora of stuff. And what it all boils down to is, I'm going to make the assumption that you're asking the question, maybe you're leading up to why don't we just do it with FETs and do it in amps instead of using 12X expensive 12X7s that are possibly going out lead and blah blah blah. And the reason is nobody really wants that. People want tube amps that use tubes, and a large proportion of those people like to be able to take the tubes out and try different ones and taste.
Are FETs cheaper or more expensive than tubes? I mean, what?
Oh, they're a fraction of the cost of tubes.
So if you embrace, okay, here's a question. Could you build an amplifier that you would be satisfied with using FETs?
Yeah, and I won't sell a single one.
Ah, interesting though.
Actually, Paul Reed Smith, one of his first amplifier outings in the early 90s was a solid state amp, and that I
remember that thing.
He was totally. It was a pretty cool looking little amp, and it sounded good. And their pitch was they put it in the room and they'd let you play through it, and then they'd ask you, "Do you think this has got EL34s in it or 6L6s?
Is it live or Memorex?" They
wouldn't say, "Do you think this is a tube or solid state?" They'd say, "Do you think this has 6L6s in it or EL34s?" And you just like go, sounds like a trick question to me.
Yeah.
You know, there was guys in the room going, "Oh, it's definitely EL34, blah blah blah." And I said, I'm trying to think why you asked that question. The only thing I can think of is that it's a solid state amp and you're trying to trip me up. And the guy looked at me and goes, "That's right." And I said, I'll tell you, it sounds great for a solid state amp, but
wait a minute. It sounds great for a solid state amp, or it sounds great. Did it sound great as an amp?
First of all, it was like $1,500 in 1992, 3.
Did you know the cost when you played through it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what made me think that it was kind of a trick question, because if it was $600, it would have been a no-brainer. It was obviously a solid state amp, right?
Yeah.
But they were, and
so how in the hell did they justify an FET amplifier at $1,500?
Well, I don't know. I don't even know that it was an FET amp. It was a solid state amp of some kind.
Oh, okay, all right.
But it probably had an FET gain stage in it. I mean, an FET is a particular kind of animal. It's not a thing that you would necessarily say you have to use it in every single stage. You use it for the characteristic that it implies, that it brings to the party. But there are other things that you would not use it for, perhaps.
Okay.
You might, MOSFETs are an extension of the field effect transistor technology that are more robust. They're more refined, and all of that. And in the 90s, they were all the rage. FET power amps. The H&H VH100 was a MOSFET power amp. I think the Hafler is a MOSFET power amp. Yeah.
It was.
Those were the thing. Well, they're MOSFETs, and so they're like, it's like a tube power amp. And if you ever played one of those, it's like, well, the H&H was a cool power amp. Had tons of power, had a really good sound, but it didn't behave and feel like a tube amp, because when you put a 2150 right next to it, as much as you like the punch and the feel of the H&H, the 2150 would just, with 1/3 of the power, would just kick out of the room.
Yeah.
You know, and that was just because of the behavior. It wasn't because the 2150 was so much better or better engineered or anything. It was just a tube amp. It had that quality.
Sure.
So that combination of qualities. So later, I had a conversation with Pat Quilter of Quilter Amps about MOSFET output stages and blah, blah, blah. He was like going, hey, these days, I asked him on some of his new designs if he was using MOSFETs. And he goes, these days, the bipolar transistors have just progressed so far that there's very little compelling reason to use MOSFETs these days. They're generally more expensive. They generally require more peripheral design stuff to make them reliable.
No kidding.
And they're just the current state-of-the-art bipolar transistor technology has eclipsed whatever MOSFETs were bringing to the table at the time. So it's just, that's just the way it is with solid state. It's progress. And,
sure.
And there's engineers and companies, big companies with big engineering budgets applying all that expertise and financial kill power to the refinement of the technology to get it more cost effective, lighter, more energy efficient, and smaller. So
I still stand by it's not exactly germane, but it's definitely germane to the way that I think about all of these tonal tools. I think I said on an early episode that I had one of those GK 250 MLs. Sounded nothing like a tube amplifier, but again, much like the Palmer, it did really specific things that I actually could not get out of my tube amplifiers. And it was really cool for what it did. And that's what I would use it for. And I kind of wish I still had one of those things. But anyhow, solid state, Galen Kruger, goofy, late 80s amplifier was what it was.
They sold a ton of those. I know, because I worked on a ton of them. So if I was I was repairing 20 of them a week, which I was.
Both of my, I actually owned 2 of them, and they both had issues kind of frequently.
I was literally repairing 20 of them a week.
Okay, that doesn't.
But if I was repairing 20 of them a week, and I'm just one shop in Los Angeles, that means maybe 5 shops across the country were all doing the same thing. So
it's frightening.
100 a week of those, and that means that they were selling 1,000 a week. You know what I mean? So,
dude, I just love how small the damn thing was. To me, it was like the first kind of lunchbox, and not a lunchbox head, mind you, a lunchbox amplifier, right? I mean, it's a complete amplifier.
Yeah, they just didn't have very good output protection. So if you shorted them out, poof, they would go.
Oh, okay.
And that was the only thing. So their next revision of it was to improve the output protection so that it wouldn't blow when it shorted.
All right, new question. Matthew Drax asks, what's closer to the tone and feel of the original GP-3 and Pittbull? The GPDI or the Synergy modules? I don't know what to pair with my 292 to get that tone and feel.
Okay, there's just so much to unpack there.
Yeah,
and I want to bang through some of these.
Yeah,
and so let's just keep banging away. And I'm just gonna say, kind of have a lot to say about that, but I don't, because tone and feel, those are 2 entirely different things.
Yep.
And how it feels sort of depends on which power amp you use it with, but in the ultra lead, the preamp and the power amp share a power supply.
Okay.
So when you turn the ultra lead up to any reasonable volume level at all, the amount of power that the power stage is pulling out of the power supply is going to influence the behavior of the preamp downstream.
Right.
And so there's a lot of the behavior of the power amp stage and the feel of it that is similar in topology, but different in the practical reality than the 292 or the PS100 because of the way they're interconnected, or because of the way they're not interconnected, because the preamps are separate, the GP3 is separate, the Synergy preamp is separate, the GP3, the GPDI preamp part is separate, but it's got a little power amp built in it, which has a slightly different behavior. And all these things are subsets of what the Ultralead does. So nothing does exactly what the Ultralead does, but everything does a little specific subset of that. The Synergy preamp has a very constrained form factor to operate within, and a lot of design constraints. You can only use 2 tubes in the design of it.
Okay.
And then there's one preamp tube that's in the platform that serves as a third tube. So that's 1, 2, 3. That's 5 total stages. But 2 of the stages are operating at slightly lower voltages than normally occur in the amp or the GP3. And then the input stage is more of a universal input stage. You can change the cathode settings and sort of get them more in the ballpark where you want them to be. And that gets you a little closer, but it's still operating at a lower plate voltage than what happens in the Ultralead. So it's basically a little subset. Of course it is. It's not a $4,000 amp, you know.
Oh yeah, forgot about that.
But there's sort of essential things. The voicing is there, and the characteristic, our approach to gain is there, and the articulation and detail is there. But the closer you get to the real thing, the closer you're going to get to the real thing. And if you were asking me of the GP3, the Pittbull, or the GPDI and Synergy modules, I don't know what to pair with my 292 to get closest to that tone and feel. I would say, I would personally say the GPDI. And the reason is because the 292 has got more power capacity than the Ultralead. Ultralead's got 4 power tubes, KT88s. The 292 has 4 power tubes, KT88s. But the Ultralead is 120 watts, and the 292 channels together are 200 watts.
In real 120 watts.
Are 100 watts per channel. So that's 200 watts if you're running both. So the power supply has more headroom and therefore sort of a little less responsiveness. So it's going to be a little drier than running ahead. So you would want to use the GPDI because it's got its own little power amp in it that you can saturate. And that will help compensate for the fact that the power amp doesn't saturate as much. So you'll get closer using the GPDI, which all the preamp stages are closer to what's happening in a real Ultralead and operating at more of the similar voltages to the Ultralead than the Synergy modules. And then compared to the GP3, well, the GP3 does a pretty damn good job of all of those things, but the GPDI power amp stage is more evolved than the little power amp module that's in the GP3. So
because the GPDI is the later iteration, right?
I mean, but the GP3 has got the 3 channels and the actual clean channel of the Ultralead in it and things like that. So the closest trade-off that gets you in the ballpark that allows you to use your 292 would be the GP3, the GPDI.
Yeah.
Okay? Man,
I want the GPDI everywhere. I want it in a pedal. Guys, I use that thing. Well, I said it earlier in this episode. Like I'm just on that thing hours and hours and hours every day, and I've been on it for years. It really is like my amplifier. I can't wait
to have it back out again. It's just the coolest thing.
Oh man, I love it. It changed my life. All right, another question from Scott Peters. If I run a 20-watt amp through the PS100, will that 20-watt amp sound like the 100-watt version of that amp, or just a louder 20-watt amp?
It'll sound like a louder 20-watt.
It's a riddle.
Yeah, if it was going to sound like a 100-watt version of that amp, that means that it would have that amp wouldn't be a 20-watt amp, it'd be a 100-watt amp. And just like we were talking about the ultra lead, the interaction between the preamp and the power amp would be the interaction of a 100-watt amp drawing current out of a power supply and causing preamp fluctuation, and the interactive thing of that. And the speakers connected to a 100-watt amp would have a different interactive relationship. So your 20-watt amp will sound like a louder version of that 20-watt amp.
Okay.
Until you get the PS100 close to clipping, which is kind of hard to do. It's pretty damn loud. But then you might start get into some of that. But I mean, still,
but there's you don't think there's any of that 100-watt big iron sonic footprint thing happening that the PS100
there is,
on everything?
But there's less voltage preamp, supply voltage interaction between the 20-watt amp. There's no power supply interaction between the 20-watt amp plugged into a power load, a power station 100, versus a 100-watt version of the amp that you're talking about, whichever amp that might be.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. Matthew Drax asks, by the way, is the Fane F70 the same as the F70G?
The construction and the basic elements, the cone and the voice coil, are the same. The basket treatment is a little different. It's part of the secret sauce. I don't really want to divulge what it is, but there is a little secret sauce going on in the frame of the F70G that makes it a little smoother sounding on the high frequencies. Otherwise, it's there. If you had the two speakers in two identical cabinets side by side and you A-B'd them and I told you what to listen for, then you'd go, oh, I hear it, and now I can't unhear it.
Is it the kind of thing?
If your ears were sensitive and you did that A-B comparison, you would hear what I was talking about. But if your ears aren't that sensitive, or your A-B setup isn't really ideal, or the two cabinets that you're using to compare them in are even remotely different, or even in different parts of the room where one part of the room is more resonant than another, there would be all kinds of other factors that would mask the difference. It's very subtle, but I'm
assuming that it might be kind of like using different materials for saddles on a guitar.
Exactly.
Where maybe to the end user, like, it's one of those things you have to point out. Like, you're not going to walk in the room and go, hey, you're using,
like stainless steel frets compared to nickel frets or something.
That's another great example.
Yeah. It's something along.
Yeah.
That,
I mean, it's a part of the
level of anal retentiveness that we all strive for.
Well, it's like, it really doesn't mean anything, except it does make a difference. It's like, yeah, it does make a difference, but
it makes a difference, and it means something when you're paying attention to it enough that it means something. But,
the line that I always use is like, but all bets are off once the drummer hits the snare.
That's right. That's right. When you're spitting champagne out at the audience and like and kicking people off the stage with steel-toed boots, the difference kind of diminishes a little bit.
Okay, wait a minute. Before we go on, you got to tell that story. Did you tell that on the show?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Never mind.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. My man, Steven, I believe it's Steven. I haven't talked to you in person, but I've read your name for years. Yeah. He asks, how does the new Fane compare to the P50E?
Interesting question.
Yeah.
We came up with the P50E when we had when we were early on in the design development, and we were trying to get Celestion to make us a speaker a particular way, and they were cooperative, and then they weren't cooperative, and then they were cooperative, and then they weren't cooperative, and it was a difficult relationship to navigate. And then I met the guys at Eminence at NAMM, and I sort of told them my plight, And they said, well, we'll work with you. And I said, we're pretty new on the block. We're not talking about container loads of speakers. And he's like, no, it's not about that. We'd love to work with you. And I'm like, great.
Wow.
So
that's a happy day.
So we worked with them to come up with the P100 and then the P75 speaker that we used in the Pittbull 45 combo, which is a phenomenal speaker. To this day, people that buy used 45 combos that somebody put another speaker in are calling us going, I need the original speaker for this. Oh yeah, we have them in stock. We always keep them in stock because people still need replacements. For the guys that took out the crappy Eminence and put in the Celestian and now it doesn't even sound like the amp anymore, and then they get it back. We spent a lot of time on that speaker. It took probably, I don't even remember how many prototypes, 10 or 11.
Wow.
Where I'm really starting to do two things. Learn the dynamics of speaker manufacturing and production and the subtleties of the different things that if you change this, it changes that kind of thing. I was learning about that. I was learning how those guys operate, and I was learning their language. So it's all in the communication, the relationship, and the language. You got to learn how to navigate that. So I'm doing all that and trying to get what I need out of a speaker. So they guided me through that whole process like the champs that they are. And so then when it came to the point where our 412 cabs, which we had been using a combination of greenbacks on the top and V30s on the bottom, and then neither one of them was the ideal thing, and it required that one microphone doesn't get you the total picture, right? And that was my big beef about that. So we needed to have the speaker that had these elements. And so when I went back to them and said, okay, here's what I need next, and I sort of ran it down to them. I sent them all kinds of dimensions and specs. I gave them all a flurry, 4 or 5 pages worth of data information. And they sent me the first sample of speaker. They sent me 8 of them. And that was the one thing. I'd work with a bunch of different speaker manufacturers who were around at the time. And I said, if you're going to send me a sample, you got to send me 8. I'm willing to pay for them, but I need 8. Don't make me one sample. That's not going to help me. It's 412 cab. And I got to do A/B testing. So I have to have 2 412 cabinets so I can A/B in different parts of the room. I need 8 samples every single time you make a speaker for this project. And some supplier, well, we'll make you one and see. I said, no, one isn't going to tell me anything.
How is that going to do anything for you if you're building 412s?
That's right. That's right.
We do the muscly amps over here, damn it.
We make a 412 cab.
Yeah.
One speaker isn't going to tell us anything. No. Don't waste your time. Well, it's expensive. I told you we'd pay for it. Well, what if we do that and you don't like them? Okay, then we paid for them. It's not your problem, is it?
Yeah.
There was a lot of that. With Emin, it was like, need 12? Yeah, no problem. 8, 12? How many you need?
Oh, man, the benefits of working with somebody who has a larger budget. That's
nice.
Yeah.
Well, they said, okay, well, there's a limit. You can have X number, and after that, you pay.
Sure,
they have a pricing structure for 50, 100, 500, and 1,000. We'll give you the end column price.
Yeah, that's fair.
You pay the 1,000-piece price on 8 speakers, but you'll have to buy those 8 extra speakers. Okay, not a big deal. Yeah. Down with it.
But if your communication is good, then you're making progress, and that's worth it.
So we got the speakers. The first batch they sent us, they nailed it first time. That's been the speaker.
Okay, but here's the question: Did you think can we push it further, or did you just know that's it? We don't need to do any more.
I went. This is it.
Wow.
And from my experience with working with them on the previous speaker, I knew that I could ask for additional salt, and once I got the additional salt, I would say there's not enough sugar in it. Just like you do when you're cooking.
But are you recognizing your own like that's your own bag? Like that's on you, in other words?
I recognize that I was so close that it's like pick a groove on a record, the same groove every time you put the needle down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I want to hear that passage one more time, exactly from the same part. You're never going to get the needle on the groove at the same spot. You're either going to be one groove past it or one groove before it.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to do an A/B
for a fun
comparison,
game, though,
to hear that groove, you blow the whole A/B comparison by having to listen to the information on the previous groove. You've lost your objectivity in that instantaneous amount of time, and that's what happens when you're A/Bing stuff. You have it so close. You've been there. You've been at our place where
I was just going to say, how many times does that happen?
Like we're saying,
a call, you're like, dude, I need another ear.
There's you and me and two other people, and we're all listening to the thing, and we've got it so close that we're all doubting each other's sanity that we're hearing something different. Yeah. That's how you know.
You need that fresh person to come in. Come on.
No, that's how you know it's time to stop, because at that point you could have 50 people in there and they'll all hear something different, and and even when you decide on it and go to production, those same 50 people will hear all those 50 things a different way.
Well, you know, that tricky
you get it so close, and then it can only be so close, and then you can overshoot or undershoot. So it was so like when I played the chord, I went, we're done with this. We're gonna roll with this because we got other stuff to do, and I don't know that I could get it any better right now.
That's
knowing what I know about how they operate and how they produce speakers. I would have wished for more power handling capacity, but I know what I would have had to sacrifice to get that.
Right.
And I just went, no, we're there. It's going to be okay. It's going to be a 50-watt speaker. It's not going to be a 75-watt speaker. It's going to be a 50-watt speaker. 4 of them in a cabinet. It's going to be a 200-watt cab. It's a well-sealed speaker cabinet. So without a lot of air leaks, our 200-watt speaker cabinet will handle a severe beating before you blow a speaker. And we hardly ever had anybody blow speakers in those cabinets. So we know that was the correct calculation. So we ran with it. But
that's awesome.
When it came to putting 2 of those in the 212 cabinet, then it would be a problem running it with a 100-watt head, because now you're right up to the limit. And
so how do you handle that?
Well,
when you get people, hey, man, I want a 212. What do I do?
You just tell them, hey, just don't beat it up. It'll blow, and that's not going to be covered under warranty. You can't do that.
So you just use your words. You just
it is what it is. Well, don't want you
okay, all right. So wait, here's the question.
Whenever we get to the point where we can make a higher power version of it, and this goes to Steven's question, we'll do that. And we couldn't get there with Celestion. And then when Fane came along, the first thing we said was, okay, this is what we need next. So we pitched it to them. They sent us a sample. We tweaked it a little bit, sent it back to them. They observed what. By this time, I'm much more experienced in how speakers behave and how to make them behave differently. Right. I have this turntable that you put the speaker on, and there's the treatment, that shiny adhesive treatment around the edge of the cone. It has a lot
cone dope.
The doping has a lot to do with how the speaker behaves and sounds,
right,
and all that. Well, I got to the point where I could accurately dope our own speakers.
Oh, no kidding!
I have a turntable. You put the speaker on it and you spin it, and I've got the doping adhesive stuff and these really fine brushes, and I carefully apply it on the spinning speaker layer by layer.
You do all that crap too? Wow.
Yep, do that, and then play it, and then take them off and add a little more and play it and go, okay, this is where we need to be. So I went through all that with them, sent them back the ones that we said, we think it's here. So now you guys try it. So they make a set and they dope them the way we asked them to. And we asked them to stiffen up the cone, try a different material. The cone that they sent on their original versions was a little too thin, and I wanted a little bit more robust. So they sent that. And we got it back and went, that's it. That sounds great. And then we went ahead and ran with the F70. That became the F70. So how is it different from the P50? Well, here's the eye opener. When we got them and finally started doing production, and then we got to the point where, okay, now we can settle down and we can set up we know that we like the Fane, the new Fane, and we can offer it, and it's an alternative to the P50 because it handles more power. And because it handles more power, it's got a little more sensitivity. Of course, it's going to bring out some of the subtleties of the amp more. It doesn't necessarily sound a whole lot different, but that's basically what we were just assuming was the case, that they don't really sound that much different. They're just, they have a
sensitivity different. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to get, okay.
More. They just have a slightly higher sensitivity because they have a bigger magnet, and the voice coil gap is tighter. It's a thinner, it's a smaller gap than in the P50s.
Okay.
And Eminence, just that's their gap width. They weren't set up to adjust their gap width. So if we asked them to tighten up the gap and raise the sensitivity, then we would have had to have a higher temperature voice coil to handle it. But again, we're going like way out of the realm of what the speaker capability is, and they weren't even interested in doing that anyway. So that was it. That was the stopping point with them. And with Fane, that was the transition point for going to Fane.
Well, I would imagine with Eminence that they're shipping so many damn speakers,
like 10,000 a day.
We have there. You're back. With Eminence, you're shipping so many speakers. I imagine the tolerances have to be actually a little bit wider than you would with somebody who's producing less. Is that a fact?
Well, I think there are a number of things, but yeah, the coding that they use, the fact that they literally make 10,000 speakers a day.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
You know, and also the packing and shipping, a tighter voice coil, it's easier, especially with a steel frame. It's easier for them to tweak, and then the voice coil is rubbing, and so the chassis has to be more robust. And you go to Eminence and say, we need a tighter voice coil, and we need the frame to be more robust, and they're going to go, all right, well, when you're ready to buy a container load of speakers and pay $5,000 to $10,000 for a
they can do it.
A robust frame for your custom speaker, we're happy to accomplish that for you.
Got it.
You have to be in that level of the game to be able to do that. Where with Fane, they were already there internally. Their frame already had that extra robustness. They're already experienced in voice coil designs with tighter voice coil gaps. So that was like the next logical step to get this to the speaker where we wanted to get to. Once we finally got all of that done and we're able to clear our heads and go back and listen A/B the speakers, we just went, holy shit. We recreated the P50 with more power,
more sensitivity.
What we were originally trying to do with the P50, and we had to stop at the P50 because of these manufacturing limitations, and we got it. And I went, how did we get it so close? And it occurred to me when we also about the same time got an old Sound City cab and listened to some earlier Fanes, I went, well, of course.
Because you were chasing the Fane with the P50 in the first place.
That I had been chasing for decades. So it was like stuck in there with nailed to the wall with rusty old nails, that DNA. It wasn't going away. And somehow it got translated into the new speaker. And of course, Fane was happy with that because that's the direction they were attempting to head anyway. So from their perspective, they just thought as, well, this makes perfect sense because this is the speaker that we want to make anyway. So there's a synchronicity there in all of that. So we got lucky. And
how cool is that?
It's very cool.
Guys, we could talk about Fane stuff and speaker stuff all night, but I'm going to keep going down these questions here. From our buddy Tyler, he's asking GPDI into the LX2. Is there a balancing act between how hard to drive the output section of the GPDI and driving the LX2, or is it just by ear? This, I know what you're going to say, I think. This is what I'd say.
The rule is it sounds good when you say it sounds good.
If it sounds
they
good,
don't say good. Haynes till I say they say Haynes.
Yeah, and I say, when I say Haynes is when you say Haynes, whenever it sounds good to you.
Yeah.
That's the magic, man. That's what this whole thing's about. Do you have anything more to say about that, or can I ask you the next question?
Yeah, because you're not gonna decide how hard to drive the LX2 power station, the section. You're going to turn it up to the point where you're at the maximum 50 watts per channel, and that's the max. So if you can play that loud, then you can sort of play with those relationships and decide where you like it. But again, it goes back to your personal taste. What sounds good to you is right.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, Jeremy Curtis. All right, I'm currently running a Synergy Syn 2 with a Pittbull module, and I'm saving up for a rack mount power amp. Would you recommend a PS2, a PS100, or an LX2 for this job?
In that, within the strict definition that you've described, I would always recommend the LX2. Why? Because it's stereo, and you can use stereo effects with it. If you're going to run a modular system, you're going to want to have effects. If you don't care about stereo, you can run the LX2 in bridge mono mode, and you got a mono 100 watt rig. So, and the LX2, you can turn one channel off and run one channel only, and it's 50 watts, which is like the PS2. And if you don't need what the PS2 has on tap, or the PS100, which is the reactive load.
Oh, the reactive load, yeah.
If you don't need that, then don't pay for it. Pay for the features and the functionality you need. The LX2 is just a great power amp. It really depends. If you the PS2 is lighter, it's less expensive, sure, but it's only one channel and it's 50 watts. Is that enough for you? Do you only need it to be mono? Then yeah, great. And then you have the ability to use it as an attenuator for one of your other amps if you've got one laying around. But if you're looking to really zero in on what the Synergy system does best, and the power amp that really optimizes the performance of it, it's a no-brainer for the LX2.
All right, awesome. All right, next question from Modern Vintage. Hey, Joe and Steve, what are some things you guys notice, look for, etc., when trying out different non-Fryette amps? Much like luthiers examining fretwork, neck joints, nut cuts, etc. You go first, and then I'll add my 2 cents.
I'd rather hear your 2 cents first.
My 2 cents comes from I'm decidedly non-technical with this stuff. I think, I mean, we've probably addressed a lot of these things in other episodes, but I think a lot of your tonal production kind of comes from whatever is already pre-existing in your noodle. So I tend to make everything I play through sound the same anyway. Much to my chagrin, sometimes I wish I could sound different, but I always kind of sound like me, you know, for better or for worse. But some things that I look for, like within the gain realm, I look for, Modern Vintage, you were talking about examining fretwork and that sort of thing. And I don't look at anything like physically, but like playing through it, I don't know if this makes sense, but it has to have like a non-congested upper mid-range. I'm just looking for a clarity in presentation of what I'm playing. If I'm playing tightly voiced stuff, I need it to speak and not get congested. And a lot of amplifiers kind of do that. And I feel like information is getting lost or jumbled, or like the resolution is compromised. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you guys. And then, I like the notes to kind of pop off the fretboard. I talk with Steve about this constantly. I get that out of his amplifiers. Oddly enough, I think some people sort of think of that as kind of like a stiff quality. But for me, I experience it like it's like a note separation quality that I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the notes to kind of dissolve into each other and it to be the super sponge fest. I really desire clarity. So, I mean, those are the main things. I mean, that's even above and beyond kind of the vowel sound stuff that we've talked about. And then I guess Some of the practical stuff would be, what is this particular amplifier going to be used for, in terms of output, and, can I get up above a drummer? I have different amplifiers over here depending on, what context I'm going to play them in, in a real kind of brute force, numbnuts manner. Like, I have the larger amps for, kind of more like rockish gigs. And then actually I don't really play jazz anymore, but, the smaller amps for that kind of thing. And then of course, all of them kind of are in play for the studio environment. But yeah, I think I'll stop there with my answer. I don't know. What do you look for, Steve, when you're not playing your own damn amps?
Does it light my fire or not? And it doesn't matter what it is.
Oh yeah, I was actually going to say the drool factor.
Just like,
can I kind of zone out and quit thinking about what I'm playing through, right?
Just like, oh, I'll take this home. First of all, I gotta like the way it looks.
That's funny. I don't give a shit how it looks.
Yeah, I gotta like the way it looks. It's gotta have a look that makes me go, oh, I'd like to plug into that. If it doesn't have that, it could be the greatest thing in the world, and I won't plug into it because it just won't. It won't attract my interest. There'll be something else in the room that will.
Oh,
right?
That's interesting.
Like, it's
also interesting that you're copping to that. So can I ask you, what is the aesthetic that you're gravitated towards visually?
Yeah, and it's not a particular aesthetic. It's just that if it has the right combination of elements that push all my little buttons. Okay. So I go into Guitar Center Hollywood a few years ago, and they had an Esquire, a 51 or 52 Esquire, and I love Esquires. And they had this blonde, sort of darkish blonde Esquire.
Do you have your Esquire right there?
Yeah. With a maple neck, and it was just like, I don't have $15,000 in my pocket, or this would be mine right now. But I just picked it up off the wall, and I played an E chord, and I just went, yeah, I could take this guitar home. I don't even have to plug it into an amp. But I just happened to be in the vintage room at GC, and I'm looking around, okay, what could I plug this into that might do this justice? And I go, well, there's a brown Vibrolux sitting on the floor. And I went, oh, okay. Brownish guitar, brownish amp. What could go wrong? I plugged that Esquire into that amp, and it sounded like a Les Paul Jr. through a Marshall 50-watt JMP, 70 JMP 50-watt half stack. It just sounded like a rock machine like you would not believe. I was just, the hair is sticking up on my arms. I'm like going, I'm screwed. I need the guitar and the amp. I don't have the budget for it, but oh my God, I can just put it on layaway, but I don't really need this. If I brought it home, how often would I actually play it? I could have figured out how to buy it if I absolutely had to do that, but I didn't. I just felt like
you were a coward.
I really have that experience, but man, it just went all through my body and soul, and it was just it was an experience. And
that's the
Aether. I didn't care if it had mustard caps in it or I didn't care anything. I just cared that what a monster rig. I could go out and play all night. I could go play with a band that I'd never played with before, songs we'd never played before, that we didn't rehearse, didn't do a sound check. I could just go plug in there, and I could feel like I owned the place.
Because you had the sauce to put on everything there.
Yeah. I was like, I could do no wrong with that rig. It just, all I had to do was just play a chord, and people would just be going, "Oh my God!" That would,
and you'd be,
that would be all there would be to it. I felt that strongly about it. That happens every once in a while. Soul Cole guitars.
Yeah,
he made a thing at a show that looks like an Esquire. I forget what model he calls it, but
he makes a
maple
hell of a
neck,
guitar.
single coil. It was built like an Esquire with his body shape and his headstock shape. Really cool looking guitar, and I picked it up and I played through it and I just shuddered. I was
Really?
like, and I played 2 or 3 different guitars in the booth, and they were like, "Oh, these are really nice," and blah blah blah. And he was there exhibiting with a couple of other luthier builder guys, and they were making some nice stuff. And I'm like, "Oh, this is nice." But when I picked up that guitar and played an E chord, I went, "Oh!" And I plugged it into an amp, and I was just electrified.
I love that.
Electrified.
We've
And
all experienced it.
I went to Saul and I said, "You can display this, but I'm taking it home." And he goes, "It's already sold."
Oh no!
And I went, "Okay."
No.
And I've had this experience before with Tom Anderson and with James Tyler and a couple of different people where I play one of their instruments that just like goes through me like that.
This is the one. This is the one.
Not available to me, but we'll make you one just like it, and it's never just like it. You know, it's just got that. It's that thing, and if it isn't happen at that moment, it's never going to happen again. I have a Les Paul Jr., a 55 Les Paul Jr. that did that to me, and I wisely went right up to the front counter and put money down on the counter, and that was my guitar, period, the end. I still have it to this day. I've had it 20 years, and every time I pick it up and play one E chord on it, I'm like going,
I've never seen that guitar, Steve. You need to show that to me. Is it there?
Answer the next question, I'll go get it.
Okay. Let's see. There was a question up here. Oh, Jeremy, you asked me a while back, speaking of effects, what effects do you feel I need as a bass? Also, do I prefer pedal or rack effects? That's one of those questions, my friend, that like it'd be better if we could talk one-on-one, and you could definitely hit me up and we could talk about this you know, as deep as we want to, because what you need, I mean, really depends on what kind of job you're doing. You know, there's like, are you functioning as a sideman for people? Like, that's a little bit easier, because then you can kind of think about what you need in terms of, you know, the tools that you need to do that particular job. What you need in order to do your own particular art is another question, you know, and then that's just something that you can only answer for yourself. So I'm happy to talk about that stuff. I love these kinds of conversations. Like for me, speaking of effects, like if I'm doing my own music, like I really only need, you know, gain and like clean gain, and then a delay-ish reverb, like that Strymon kind of thing. And that works perfectly for me. Everything else is kind of superfluous. But if I'm functioning as a sideman, that's a whole different thing. So I actually have a pedal board for my own music, and then I have a pedal board for functioning as a sideman, because I kind of need to have everything available, you know, for kind of playing popular music. So anyway, you know, hit me up, you know, if you want to. I guess Instagram would probably be the easiest, and we can talk about that if you want. And then also, if I prefer pedal or rack effects, definitely pedals, because, you know, like Steve said earlier, like I'm lazy too. And working as a sideman forever, like my kind of thing is like, can I get in and out of this gig with one trip, like with my amplifier and my pedal board? So I don't want to be lugging a rack in and that sort of thing. And so just a small-ish pedal board works best for me. So, and definitely Jeremy or anyone else, if you want to ask me more about that stuff, just hit me up anywhere. I'm kind of easy to find online. So now, Steve, what you got? Show me a guitar. Dude, I really haven't seen that before. Okay, now describe again, what is this other than beautiful?
It's a 55 Les Paul Jr.
Oh my God.
So I see
that's
this.
A real 55. That's not a historic. That's from 1955.
9 feet 55. 55.
Okay, what year did you buy that in?
96, 95.
Wow.
Still smells like
It looks like it's in amazing condition. Like
the
finish is shiny.
Finished checking on it, and but here's the thing: I go into the store. It's hanging on the rack. I didn't take
what
it down.
store?
This just shopped on Hollywood Boulevard. I think it was called Guitars R Us. They're not there anymore.
Okay.
It was hanging on the wall on the upper rack. I didn't even take it down off the rack. I went and I looked at it. You know, it was hanging on the rack, and I went and I looked at it, and I went, it looks great. And so I reached up while it was on the rack, and I just did this.
On the rack.
On the rack.
And you could just hear. Oh.
And I went up and I said, how much? And he told me. And I said, I've got like half of that in cash on me. And can I just put it on layaway until I'll come back on next Monday and pick it up? Goes, yeah, sure. He knew who I was. And he was like,
original frets?
No, it's been refretted.
Oh, perfect. I love that. Did you have it refretted?
No.
That's the best.
Already refretted.
That's the best.
They're slightly wider frets.
Yeah.
120s. See, but I didn't even know that. I didn't even think about that. I just went, and I went, I went. I left. Yeah. When I came back, it was still on the wall, but it had a sold tag on it. When I came back, I gave him the rest of the money, and then I went and took it down off the wall, and then I plugged it into an amp, and I went, yep, and I left. And then I went back to the shop and I plugged it into one of our own amps. And do
you remember which one?
Well, at that time we were only making the Pittbull Classic, so
okay.
Through. And I don't even remember what I did with it. I probably played it through the clean channel cranked, because that's the kind of guitar that it is. And I just, I just immediately bonded with it, and that's just how you do it.
Yeah,
that's how it's done.
I have
something moves you like that. It's meant to be, and if it's meant to be, it's gonna be.
I have I actually own a real 57 Strat, and it sounds like the same sort of thing as your guitar there, in that like all of the things that you'd want done to the guitar or changed have been done to kind of knock the value down, but make it like more of a player guitar. So my guitar, the frets were redone, and then it had a body only refin. So like it kind of made it sort of affordable to me.
Yeah. This is the only thing that's not stock about this are the tuners and the frets. The tuners are shallers, but I've got the original tuners.
Oh man. So like everything that you want, that you need to be original is original, and then the stuff that knocks the value down so you can buy it or replaced. That's awesome.
Right. Yeah. Man. So that was just one of those occasions where it's just like
I need to play that sometime. I really want to play it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you another question.
Way about I fit the custom shop, the Strat, the same thing. I felt the same way about that. E-chord, boom, I'm done. Great.
Oh, dude, your Strat is sickening.
And it just so happened that the guy that worked in the guitar department at the GC that I bought that from, which was Sherman Oaks, he had been saving up for an ultra lead. So I said, we have a demo ultra lead at the shop from the last NAMM show.
Let's make a deal.
And trade him the ultra lead for the Strat, and I think a couple $100 difference or something like that. I don't even remember what the deal was, but I left the ultra lead there and I left with the Strat, and he probably bought the amp off the store stock after doing the deal.
So that is I believe, what is that? Like a 56.
Yeah.
It's a custom shop. It's a 56 Closet Classic.
It's a 56.
Or is it a Relic?
It's a 56 GC Relic.
A GC Relic. What's the GC?
What makes it a GC Relic
is the radius different?
The radius is flatter. Don't ask me.
Probably 9.5.
Don't ask me. I don't know. I don't know from No Radius Bang.
I think it's 9.5 because I've played it.
And it's got the 6120 frets on it, and that's what makes it a GC version. They spec'd it out with the flatter radius and the wider frets.
Guys,
And
that guitar is the shit.
If you take the neck out, on the back of the neck, it's stamped GC.
Okay, all right.
So they basically contracted Fender to make that guitar exclusively for their store.
Yeah, I used to when I lived in Colorado, I used to teach guitar at Wildwood Guitars, and Wildwood, if any of you guys know, like they've done a ton of stuff with Fender overall, and definitely the custom shop too. They have the Wildwood 10s.
Yeah.
So it's like the custom shop stuff with the 10-inch radius and maybe some other tweaks, but incredible guitars. So anyway, Steve, I'm going to ask you another question because that's my job here. This is from our buddy Modern Vintage again. Do you guys offer master built Deliverance 2s, Series 2s, or is that just for the end of life cycle amplifiers? An example, the Deliverance version 1 or the Ultra Lead the CLX. And
yeah, master
built started at this. I'm going to run up and get a little bit more water.
Master built simply means that one guy who knows every single assembly operation from beginning to end builds a particular model of amp. And we use that master built facility in two ways. In one scenario, the Aether amps are all master built. They're built by one guy because he knows every single aspect of building the amp from top to bottom. Every wire, the length, how it's bent, how the capacitors and resistors are placed inside and formed and soldered, and just how I want it to look when it's finished. Because I built the first one as the sample. And actually, sounds like there's a little echo. You guys hear an echo? I'm not the most pristine soldering guy, assembly guy on the planet. That's really not my job. I design stuff. I kind of visualize how it's supposed to look inside and how I want it to be assembled and built, and it's got to look neat and pristine inside. But I'm not the captain of that. I'm not the king of the ultimate pristine assembly job. I basically tell the master builder what I want it to look like, and I show him an example, and then he takes my example, he builds one to my example only with his cleaner, more refined workmanship. And then when he's done, I look at it and I go, okay, he made me look like a jerk again. No, but seriously, that's his job, is to do it better than the guy that does it all day long. Of course, is going to do it better than the guy that does it once a month. So that's why every Aether looks like it does. How they look identical inside, even though they're viciously point-to-point wired, and because they're made by one guy. And so that's an example of a current model that's always going to be made that way. And we don't do tons and tons of them, obviously. So we don't have to worry about one guy getting too loaded down with production. We're just going to make X number of those in a year or a quarter or whatever, and then that's going to be it. And so we schedule out his time so that he can do those. With the Deliverance, for example, or the Ultra Lead, when we did master builds of those, it's because they had transitioned from a time where we were making 20 to 100 of them a month, where they were broken out more in assembly processes for where different people were doing different aspects of those processes, to the point where the demand was down, the model was older and not in such demand anymore, or like in the case of the economy tanking, there just wasn't demand for them, but there were orders for them. They would be built master built style by one guy from top to bottom, because he's the guy that you could depend on to build them perfectly from top to bottom, and there would be no errors. And they're not enough. He's not there. There aren't 20 being built in a day to where we have to apportion the assembly processes out so that they get built more efficiently. That's basically the two different aspects of master built stuff. So the new Deliverance Series II don't fall under the master built category, even though they're built just as well as the master built stuff, but they're built more production style because we're building 20 in a week, every week. Just to give you an idea of what kind of demand has returned on the big amps that we actually didn't even anticipate.
That's nuts. I didn't even know that.
I was shocked because I'm doing my thing. I'm completely buried in all my projects right now, so I don't always get the bird's eye. I get sort of like the overview of what's happening during the course of a day or a week, and that certain things are getting built and certain things are getting shipped, and there are maybe some technical issues that need to be resolved, and I'm the only one that can resolve those and figure out what's going on with them. And so I get my nose in it. Otherwise, I'm kind of staying out of people's way and doing my job or my number of jobs. So when I see a stack of D120s going out, I'm like, geez, where are all these going? That happened at a time when nobody's out playing live, and like there's 20 Deliverance 120s going out, and I'm like, man, somebody's building some wicked man caves out there.
Yeah, exactly. We got a bunch of caves happening.
But I got to appreciate that. I know here that nothing short of an amp that will knock the windows out of the house will do, on any given day. That's just like that feel.
Yeah, but you know what, Steve? You should play this amp called the Aether sometime. It's the best thing I've ever played through.
I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's not a big amp, but it's the best thing you'll ever play through.
It's funny that you should say that, but it's just like in the last month, the demand is shooting up. We're doing another run.
Guys, the Aether, I'm going to sound like a bootlicker again. The Aether is the best small amp ever built, ever created. I'll fight anyone over that assertion.
And when people ask me what that amp is about and how it's just like all of our other amps, I go, I can't tell you what it's about, and it's unlike anything else we ever made and ever will make.
And before we move on to the next question, I'll just say that one of the things I was pitching to Steve, and we're not going to do this every week, obviously, but we want to spend particular episodes really doing a deep dive on particular models that VHT Fryette has put out through the time that he's been in the game. So I definitely want to do one on the Aether because it's my favorite small amp ever. So anyway, I'm going to ask you another question. You ready?
Yeah.
It's from Tyler again. Is there any value in exploring tube options in the GPDI?
Yeah.
Of course. If you get into that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, if it makes you happy.
There's always value in monkeying around with that stuff.
Yeah, you'll always. And Wayne, by the way, if you're still with us, I just stumbled across. I'm not a big giant fan of JJ 12AX7s, the ECC 83s. Never have been, just because I've been so happy with the Shuguangs that we've used for so long that I was just used to it. And Shay. And I just love it when you bring her on. But the fact is, right now, Shuguang tubes are unavailable because the factory is down temporarily. They say it'll be back next year. We shall see. But of the available alternatives, the JJ ECC 83 has turned out to be a pretty good overall substitute in the majority of the positions in the amps that aren't super critical, like V1. V1, the JJ doesn't really cut it all that much. But in the other stages, they turned out to be just fine. Well, we are doing a run of Sound City SC30 combos right now. And it's the first batch we've done without the Shuguang 12AX7s in it. And we put the JJs in this time in positions 2 and 3. And I had been monkeying around with the amp for this batch, thinking that I might want to tweak the top end a little bit. Because one day I heard it, I thought it sounded maybe just a little bit forward on the top end, and I wasn't sure if I liked that or if I'd ever even paid that much attention to it. Sometimes just being away from something for a while gives you a fresh perspective. And since I hadn't had them in production for a few months, I had a clear head about it, and I just went, this might be something I want to mess with. So I tweaked it a little bit, and then we put it through the people at the shop, the people with the ears getting together and going, do we like it? Do we not? Does it make sense to make this change now or not? Or blah, 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 blah. And what I found was that everybody kind of went, oh yeah, I kind of like that. And then a few minutes later they went, no, I don't actually, you know what? I don't like it.
Oh, that's interesting.
The new way. And
it's like immediate icing, and then that's actually too sweet.
Yeah. It was kind of funny. And, at the same time, I thought, well, okay, maybe that was too extreme of a change, even though it was a really subtle change. Mm-hmm. In that context, it was pretty striking. So I put it back the way it was, but took the sample reference amp that I had the Shuguang 12AX7s in it. Mm-hmm. And so we put the one that I was messing with, we put Shuguangs in that because we have a small batch of them, so that we would have them both the same way, so that we were only evaluating the circuit change, not a completely different animal.
Right.
And then I went and I put the JJ 12AX7s in both amps. Okay. And now the one that I modified was really like not cutting it. And the stock one was like, that's really all it needed. It just sweetened up the top end a tiny bit to where it was more musical and open on the top, which isn't really my general feeling about the JJ tube. But in this particular context, it was like just exactly what the doctor ordered. So I went, wow, well, we're going through that, and this really great guitar player, friend of ours and member of our family, Jamie Kime, who plays
Jamie's the man.
The Frank Zappa people, and he does all kinds of different gigs. He plays at the
He's a guitar ninja.
He is a guitar ninja.
Yeah.
And he just comes by he's getting ready to go out with the Zappa guys, and they're going to open for King Crimson.
What a crap!
He's getting ready to go out on the road after being locked up in his apartment for a year and a half. He's gearing up to go out for a tour. He's all stoked, and he's got a power station, so he wants to rack mount it. So he came over to pick up a rack kit, and so he just
with his
shows
PS1.
Up.
Does he still have the PS1?
He's still got the PS1. He's like one of those. Hey, I'll get you the 100 or the new PS2. He goes, Nah, I'm fine with the PS1.
I remember telling him, the 2 was coming out. You can get one, and he was like, "This one sounds really good. I think I'm good."
Yeah. He's like that. He's like, no. We don't mess.
Yeah. Keep it simple, stupid.
Once that problem is solved, we don't open that manhole cover.
Right, and he sounds amazing always.
So he just came to pick up the rack kit, and I said, do you mind if I borrow your ears for a sec? And he goes, oh yeah. What do you got? So I had him come back, and I had the Hendrix Strat, and I plugged him in to both of the amps, and the original one, but had the new JJs in it, and he's playing. And I didn't realize this. I've seen him play a bunch, but I didn't realize he nails the strings. He digs in hard like I do. And I thought that might have been part of what was irritating me about the amp, is I've still got this thing that, if I'm not knocking molecules out of the string when I'm playing, I'm doing something wrong. So here he is, like snapping those strings and trying to yank them off the guitar the way I am. And I'm like going, I didn't know that about you. But
that's interesting. He doesn't really do that when he plays the Paul, which he normally plays.
I don't know, but he was like, he was like, no, that's the way I play. I was like, oh, surprised. So anyway, it doesn't look like that when he's playing live, but I'm looking really close and I'm going, man, you're smacking those strings around. Anyway, so he plays and he says, I don't know, I think the original one has a little something extra. And the new one is the one that I had done this little mod that took off a little bit of the sting off the top.
Yeah.
He liked the original one, but with the JJ tubes, it had a little bit of that claw, but it wasn't painful. And he was just like, oh, yeah, this one, without a doubt, it's this one. And listening to him play, sure enough. And then after he left and I played and I went, oh, yeah, that's it. So that's this whole thing. 2 or 3 hours of that day went over agonizing over just a little tiny bit of treble response. And should we dial it back a little bit or blah, blah, blah. And then it ended up being, no, why don't we just change the tube formula a little bit? And it's just like striking. And
Jamie's a good partner for that kind of thing because I know he's super into that kind of thing.
So
split hairs for days.
So the reason I name checked Wayne on this conversation is because he's got an SC20 and he's a clean player.
That's right.
And so I want you, if you're still here, I want you to, when you get a chance, get a couple of the JJ ECC 83s and put them in position V2 and V3.
I'll hit Wayne up anyway, even if he's not on here right now.
And tell me what you think about that. So,
all right, cool.
All right. Where are we next?
John, to answer your question about feeding, you're feeding an abandoned kitty? I love you, man. That's how you do it. That's doing it right. Sheba or fancy fees.
That is responding to God's calling to take care of these little defenseless creatures that need us to be caring for them.
I love that, John. That makes me happy. My cat, she's got all these health issues. Her food, her food sack this big is $50 a bag. It's this Ultimino diet. She can't even eat anything with animal protein in it anymore. She's allergic to that, and she's got cancer. So she's a super expensive cat. So, John, man, whatever you can afford, brother, they're going to be happy to be fed. So that makes me happy that you're doing that. Simon's asking a question on here real quick that I think there's maybe the exact same question on our list or something similar. The idea is
it, and here's my take on that. 120.
Yeah.
Why?
120 to the PS. Yeah.
Yeah, because even though you've got the power station and you can crank the amp anyway, but still the 120 has got the kind of kill power that maybe is overkill for you to be able to crank it and get that feel. It still has a wider footprint than the 60. A 60 watt amp is going to have a slightly different character than a 120, no matter how close you try to make them. And as we discussed before, the 60 and 120 used to be markedly different animals. And in the new Series 2, we've brought them together more so that they're in the same territory, so that one is essentially a higher powered, bigger footprint animal than the other one, but they're both more like siblings, and rather than like in the past where they were like two different personalities. So I like, you've got the bigger iron, you got the bigger output transformer, you've got 4 tubes, and when you attack this, do the pick attack on the strings, it has a certain kind of feel and response. And if you like the feel and the personality and the behavior of the 60, then run that through the PS100 and it will still have that quality. But if you're thinking that I only need the 60 since I'm running it with a PS100, it won't exactly have that quality. It won't have the 120 quality unless it's the 120. And I'm not trying to sell you up It's just a fact of life. When I play, and I gauge everything by what happens when I hit the strings. I'm really aware of pick attack because I've always been one to overdo it. And then the past number of years, I've been really aware of how much more I can get out of my playing if I modulate my pick attack instead of just trying to hammer it to death all the time.
That's interesting.
And I find that the 100 watt amp in general gives me the ability of extending the range of how I modulate pick attack than a lower.
I agree with that completely. I feel like my right hand, guys, is like I feel it really it doesn't work well. It's a really blunt tool. I've worked really hard on my right hand with guitar playing, and it's just like I feel so ham-fisted with it. But still, when I play the larger amps, 120 watt amp, it feels like I get an upgrade in my software or something. And you were leaning towards the 120, Simon. That's awesome. By the way, guys, if you're looking at Simon, check him out. He's an Australian guitar player who's just ripping. I think there's a lot of great guitar players who hang out with us here. Wayne, definitely. I want to hear all you guys. Steve, you want another question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's going to be, we have a couple of questions that we have to be sure to get to, and we're getting pretty far along here, so we should watch it because we have a special guest that has some questions. We want to get to that pretty quickly. So maybe we can just bang the rest of these out really quick.
Okay. All right. This is from Jeremy Curtis. All this talk of tubes reminds me of a question my brother asked me and I could not answer. Is there a way to test the health of your tube, Steve?
Really, no. These old tube testers that are basically they're not that great. They're really designed to sort of tell you that the tube is operating within an acceptable range of its design parameters, and that's the best you get out of those. Good, weak, strong. I mean, the old Hickox. I've got an old Ico here, they just, some of the better ones of those vintage tube testers are just a couple of steps above the drugstore tube tester that my dad used to take me to when we went down to the drugstore, when he took all the tubes out of the TV and put them in the tube tester and flicked them with his finger and pushed the test button and blah, 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 blah. And so you'd go through he had them all in a brown paper bag, and he would take them out, and the ones that said good, he put in the other bag, and then the ones that were bad, he put in the little tray. And then once he was done, there was little 2 doors underneath the tester kiosk that had tubes in it, and you pick out the ones that you needed to replace, and then you went to the counter and you paid for those, and it was all on the honor system, right? And then away we would go.
Wow.
That's pretty much what those tube testers did. And the ones that people that are on the internet or on eBay that say that they test tubes with the Hickok 551 or whatever the hell the model was, I'm just rattling a random number off my head. It's irrelevant. They're general sort of, yeah, it's good, no, it's not good kind of testers.
So they're really not accurate.
They're designed to test a couple of hundred or so different types, and one tube tester can't really do all that. And an expensive curve tracer won't really tell you that much more. What you really know about the health of your tubes is they work or they don't work. And like we said before, a lot of what causes the tubes to fail or become cantankerous is vibration and loosening them up mechanically inside. If they're working, they're working. And they don't leak like tires. So they're in a glass envelope. And yes, gas does enter the envelope over time. oxygen does get inside the vacuum from outside of the glass over time, a very small amount. And the getter in the tube, inside the tube, is still active even after the tube was manufactured to absorb a certain amount of that over a certain amount of time. But after 30, 40 years, that getter finally just gets saturated. And that's where the tube starts to get weaker. So tubes aging, literally, they have to be aged in order to age. So a tube has to be 10, 20, 30, 40 years old. And a lot of the time we get old amps from, we get amps from the 90s, early 90s, mid 90s that still have all the original preamp tubes and power tubes in them. And they really only need the power tubes replaced. We go through and check the preamp tubes, but most of the time they don't need to be replaced. And so we usually leave them in there unless they're microphonic or humming or doing something really obviously bad. If they're just sort of generally in the same operating parameters of a brand new one, which most of the time they are, then they stay.
Yeah.
And the guys that send us amps to get worked on that, I put my special formula of new old stock tubes in there. Most of the time those tubes are weaker, or they're really microphonic and practically useless, or they don't sound that good in the amp because it isn't a particularly good application for that particular amplifier. Any of those kind of things, those are all just kind of, they're judgment calls, really.
Okay.
How do you keep your tubes in good health? Is just like, if
don't roll it across the parking lot after the gig.
Yeah, exactly.
Pick the damn thing up, carry it, go to the gym, work out. So you can
don't leave it in your trunk in minus 30-degree weather and then pull it into a hot club and turn it on and start wailing away. Give it a chance to warm up, just like you would with your guitar.
Look, I've done all the stuff you're not supposed to. And I always think, man, I'm wheeling this thing across the parking lot and I know these tubes are still warm. And I always think if they're warm, like they're even more susceptible to warping in there when I'm doing this. But I've done it anyway.
Yeah. Wayne says that David Torn is a D120 fan. And David Torn is a guy that uses a D120 into a power station. And he's played the 60 and it's
he
like
wants the big footprint.
He never plays it, loud enough to hurt his ears because his ears are sensitive. So he keeps it cranked down pretty far, but he will not relinquish on the 120 watt amp. It's got that right stew for him. And
the 120 is the right iteration for him.
Yeah.
Another question. This is from Modern Vintage again. Steve, regarding the Deliverance 120 Mark II. Even the master being so great, would a power station be best for optimal feel and tone by cranking the amp's master?
As we kind of illustrated a couple of shows ago, what the power station allows you to do is to find the right volume that you want to be at and balance the preamp volume with just the onset of power amp saturation at the most comfortable volume for you. So what I like to use it doesn't matter for me if it's the PS100 or the PS2. What matters is that I can dial the amp down to where it's comfortable volume for whatever application I'm using it for at the time, whether it's really quiet or not so quiet or pretty loud. Still not as loud as the 120, but what I'm really not looking for so much is volume adjustment. I'm looking for the right volume for the situation I'm in and being able to fine tune the onset of power amp saturation. Not too squishy, not too clear and detailed, just at the point right where the power amp just starts to slide over into saturation is where I like it.
But that's your particular application, because Steve, I know that your thing is like you're not setting your personal amps up like full right hand sweepish. You're not like a super high gain, like let's dime everything. So, I guess what I'm saying is your mileage may vary depending on,
Absolutely. I'm looking for a particular harmonic balance, the harmonic saturation of the output transformer combined with the harmonic saturation of the certain amount of gain applied to the preamp stages and blah, blah. I'm looking for a particular blend. I'm not looking for a whole lot of anything. just
Yeah,
a little,
yeah.
a little bit of that and the right amount of blah 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 blah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's see. Modern vintage again. Yeah, I've been drinking. Steve, regarding amplifier parts, which parts in particular have been most difficult to source or that require new manufacturers due to issues from this past year? Transformers just seem to be difficult in particular.
Transformers are difficult because one big transformer supplier shut their doors and caused amplifier companies to scramble to the other well-known suppliers. And all suppliers have a different way of doing things. So what you do when you change transformer suppliers is this thing about, well, so-and-so makes better transformers than so-and-so. That's only true to the extent that you're talking about a really good supplier versus a crappy one.
Okay.
And that you know enough about your transformer designs to translate your designs to another, from one good supplier to another good supplier. So when you're making that transition from one quality supplier to another known quality supplier, you don't offload upon them the responsibility of capturing everything about your existing parts that you think are important.
Oh, I'd be way too anal retentive to do that. You need to be able to do that yourself.
You have to do it yourself because you can't depend on every supplier has their processes.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody uses.
You almost have to circumvent that depending on who you're working with to make sure that
most
you get
of the suppliers, they probably use similar or the same machinery. They
Okay.
use similar or the same calculation programs to arrive at certain things, but all of those aspects of production are set by individual parameters, and how you set those parameters determine what the outcome is of the design. So so if you just take a transformer and you give it to another supplier, here, make this, and then what you get back, you say thanks, and you put it in your amp, and then a customer goes,
what
the amp of the new transformer sounds totally different than the amp of the other transformers. If you did that, then it's on you.
Right.
Because you didn't tell the new supplier what aspects of the performance you're optimizing for.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to know that. And if they don't know that, if you don't tell them that, or if you don't develop a relationship with their design engineers so that they understand what your priority parameters are in order of performance, how would they know? You're just assuming that they know something.
A transformer manufacturer doesn't give a damn about, the individual tonal characteristics of your amplifier.
Yeah, they don't. How would they know that? There are so different aspects of it. So you have to be able to translate that and communicate that to another supplier. So that is what causes things to change and slip in production and end up different. And sometimes, like in the early days of Marshalls, when they switched from Drake to whatever the other supplier was, or from whatever it was to Drake, I don't recall the details right at the moment. It's not important. What's important is they didn't apply a whole lot of scrutiny to what they were changing to. They just changed suppliers because it was convenient to do so. It was in the ballpark, close enough for close enough for us. And Dagnall, thank you. It was close enough. It was more important that the new supplier probably gave them a better price and a better delivery time. And that probably was of their top priority at the time.
Because it was early in this whole thing.
How many layers of wire before you put a layer of insulation? These days we're a lot more particular about a part than they were then. It's like, oh, this supplier gave us, we got a $5 cheaper per part transformer, and with an order of 10,000 transformers, that's a lot of money. So a manufacturer might say, the slight difference in performance isn't enough. It actually doesn't detract from the performance. It actually, like we experienced the other day, it adds a quality that maybe we find desirable, and people, the customer will probably go, oh, that's a nice iteration. That's different. Some people say, I hate it. It's not like the old one. Another person would go, oh, that's great. I know what I can do with that sound. I've been hoping that they would make an amp that had a little bit more sparkle on the top or whatever. I mean, all those things. But as far as last week our transformer supplier called us and said, yeah, we can build all your transformers. We just can't put any covers on them because it could take 16 weeks to get covers.
Yeah.
And we're like, without the covers, we don't have transformers. So you can make all the transformers you want, but without covers, we're 16 weeks away from having parts. And we basically said, then if that's really what's going on, then we'll go out and find covers from whatever an alternate supplier is. And you just build us the transformers without covers and we'll put them on.
Yeah.
But that's really, they're in the transformer game. So they know who all the suppliers that make the different covers are.
Right.
So we were like just going, no, we need you to go out and hunt and find. And they came back a day later and went, okay, yeah, we found an alternate supplier. We just quoted you worst case in the event that we weren't able to dredge that out.
Mm-hmm.
While that's going on, another supplier says, oh, the jacks that we use for one particular product, that went from being in stock to 28 weeks delivery. And that stuff is happening every day now here and at Synergy and at Fender and at Mesa and at everywhere. Everybody is brutal. It's brutal out there. We're constantly watching the suppliers and searching online inventories and seeing who has what where and when we can get it. We're buying more inventory than we normally do.
I was going to ask if you start thinking, maybe Wool Moonlight is one of these people who like kind of hoards all of these, like a particular.
Well, there are suppliers that specialize in hoarding parts that they know I turn, and like for example, one jack that we use that's about $1, and we found a supplier that had 3,200 of them in stock for $50 a piece. But hey, give us your quantity requirement, and maybe we can give you a little discount off of the 500%.
How about you kiss my butt?
Yeah, so there's a lot of that going on out there. It's insane. You got to go to this. I got to find the URL, but you guys have got to go online.
The shipping thing?
One of these vessel tracking sites and zoom out on the world. It looks like literally there are locusts completely devouring the oceans. That's how many ships are out there.
That's freaky.
And the amount of goods that are being transported from one continent to another continent on an hourly basis is staggering. It's staggering. It's mind-blowing. Yeah. You have no idea how many ships there are at sea until you see that zoomed out.
I need to see that. You've talked about this. That sounds really
on
interesting.
A planetary level. It just boggles the mind. And it's amazing that, these little multi-cent parts, how they can even be that inexpensive when there's all this logistical stuff. They're being made, put in a box, sent to a place. That box gets sent to another place, and then that place takes it down to a dock, and then union guys take it off the dock and put it in a container, and then the container gets put on the ship, and then the ship gets sits there in the dock for weeks until it's completely filled up with other containers, and then it leaves, and then it's on the water for between 2 and 6 weeks, and then the whole thing happens again at the next port in reverse. And how that part can be $1 part, it just blows your mind when you think about
everything blows your mind like that.
All the ancillary labor that goes just to take that little tiny piece of plastic from one location to another location 3,000 miles away is just mind-boggling that it's anything even get made for any price. Yeah. So we're dealing with wood was a big issue, and now
like cabinets and shells, head shells.
And just because the
John, you're totally right. There's a lot of that going on. Steve was talking about that. like shipments just sitting out there that can't get in to port. It's just sitting out there for weeks.
Yeah, we had some electronic parts that we were waiting from overseas, and the ship took 2 weeks to get from its port to the port of LA. It took 2 weeks
around the world.
around the world, halfway around the world in 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks anchored in the harbor in the Long Beach harbor, waiting for a berth to unload.
That's so nuts, man.
Just mind-boggling. Anyway,
hey, Simon, to answer your question real fast about tube vibration stuff, I don't really have much to offer. Like the road work that I've done, if it's fly dates, I don't fly with my own stuff. You know, I'm not doing things that have that much of a budget. You know, I just show up and, you know, play what's on the rider or whatever, or, you know, or I'm doing things that the road work is like, you know, you're hauling your own gear and you're on the road, you know, you're not flying. So I don't have anything to offer there.
Looks like we've got three or four more to bang out.
On the main list.
Yeah.
Is that it? Oh yeah, we're actually getting to the bottom. This is wonderful. Let's see, where are we at? I have had plenty to drink and I'm lost. Let's see. We have one. This is from Steven again. Oh, no, here's a good one. This is from our buddy Bear. What's the due date looking for the GPDI?
Well, like we just discussed, we're dealing with chip issues right at the moment. It was looking like July, and now it's looking like August or September. We're just waiting for a key chip that was everywhere, and now it's nowhere.
And hey, I got to play through. I don't know what you'd call it. Is it a prototype? I don't know.
It's the pre-production GPDI with the new power supply in it.
It's ripping, guys. I can't wait to get my hands on it myself. Cool. Yeah, it's super cool. And being again, I'll just say like the GPDI is my most used piece of gear.
And the GPDI has been really popular, and it's got a really distinctive sound quality, but it's very versatile, and it's got a nice harmonic balance and stuff. And it's not the kind of thing that we're going to mess with on the new version, but the new version power supply does allow us to do a little bit of tweaking in the output.
It's better.
That sounds basically the same, but it just has a little bit nicer, smoother harmonic overdrive in the output stage, because we could bias it a little cooler because this new supply gave us some advantages that the old supply didn't have.
Yeah. I can't wait to do our episode here where we talk the hell out of everything that went into that unit. But let's move on with more questions.
Yeah.
This is our buddy Steven again. Is it possible to go past the 200 watt input limit of the power station with the Deliverance 120? That's an important question.
Yes, it is. You definitely want to plug it in and have the fan running if you do that. But I mean, you really have to turn the master volume on the D120 way into saturation to get it to do that. And then, it'll be, no, I don't know if it'll go to 200. It'll go to 150. Will it go to 200? No. Will it make the power station 100 damn hot on either the PS2 or the PS100? Yeah, it'll make the load hot even with the fan running. It'll just get hot. But
was there like a time limit that you'd like?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It kind of really depends on where you set the master volume, where you like the saturation point. If you like to squish the hell out of the output stage, and I got the impression that you're not the kind of person that does, then you have to be concerned about that. But if you're not, then you don't. You're going to be in a pretty safe territory.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And Steven, if you're listening, if you're on here today, comment real fast by the end of the broadcast of how you kind of run your Deliverance, and then we can comment on that. Next question, Modern Vintage, talking about the Aether again. Can you discuss the ambience bold versus light setting on the Aether?
It's a feedback setting, basically, and we'll get into the details of the Aether in a later show.
I'm looking forward to that show.
We'll do a deep dive on that. But it sets the negative feedback in the output stage. So the bold setting is less negative feedback, and the light setting is normal, which is a little bit more negative feedback. So that tightens up the output.
Okay, can you explain succinctly what negative feedback means in an amplifier for those who don't know?
Okay, in an amplifier, in a power amp, it's a traditional design of the power amp is to take a small amount of the output signal and feed it back into the input stage of the power amp. And the reason you do that is to reduce noise, reduce distortion. And I'm not talking about overdrive. I'm talking about harmonic distortion, total harmonic THD of an amplifier design inherent in the design, and the behavior of the output transformer. Output transformers by themselves are not necessarily linear devices. You have to linearize them by the design choices you make of the circuitry around the output transformer. You know, roll off, headroom of the phase inverter, type of phase inverter, the impedance of the primary versus the secondary, all these things. So at the end of all that dirty work of getting to the most linear output power amp output circuit that you can, you might apply some negative feedback to sort of add the icing on the cake to make the amp more linear in hi-fi terms. And that's really a hi-fi thing. But guitar amplifiers use feedback too. And these days we use feedback to tweak the behavior of a guitar power amp stage to make it sound more, to make it color the sound more or less. So like in the power station, it's got a very minimal amount of negative feedback to help just linearize the thing so that it sounds more neutral, so it doesn't color the sound of your other amp that you're using with it.
You don't want that with the power station.
Which is why you can use a 6L6 power station with a Marshall and not make it not sound like an EL34 amp. That's kind of what feedback imparts to that. In the Aether, we use feedback to change its character of the behavior vis-a-vis the relationship between the power amp and the speaker that's in there, which is a custom-made Alnico speaker. So those two settings are there to make it sound more wide open in a particular environment. Like a dead room, you might want it to sound more resonant. And in a live room, you might want to tame that down. And that's what those two positions of those switches do. Okay?
All right. Okay. Modern Vintage asks, did or does Unearth use Deliverance amps?
They did. They were there was a period of time where they toured with Deliverance amps and cabs, and they were really into it for a while. And it turned out that they actually did prefer squishier amps.
Interesting.
I thought the opposite. They're very articulate players. They're very fast. You know, actually, both of those guys are really good guitar players. But they're shredding all the time through their set. Both of them. 7-string guitars. I mean, they're both just shredding from the beginning of the set to the end. And you do that 6 nights a week on a 3-month tour, you know, it gets tiring. And the Deliverance is a demanding amp. You know, it's not a 5150. It's not a rectifier, you know.
It's not the Sponge Master.
Right. And sometimes they just like want relief from the demand of and we're going
satisfaction.
But we're going, even when you make mistakes, you sound great and nobody hears it. And if you make a couple of mistakes once in a while, so what? Everybody hears what you play so well. It really brings out what the skill level that you guys are at. And you ought to, you know, you guys got to think about that. And they were like, but. And I know Ken Sushi still uses, he's got a 292 power amp now. He's using the Synergy system, and he's got an ultra lead module, and he loves it. And you know, they've gone through some gear evolutions and stuff like that. But at the time, they were they felt like that they needed a break from the accuracy of the Deliverance amps, and they still used them for a while.
That's
And they
interesting.
incorporated a 5150 in there to get the squish factor and bury the, basically make life easier for them on the road. And I can understand that, but at the same time, I did my best to try to get them to like rise to the occasion and like really just
they did for a while.
Why don't you guys think of it this way? You're just gonna burn everybody down on the planet and just like be legendary for that. Why don't you just do it that way? That was me being an advocate for their excellence
but ultimately, people got to be happy with what they're playing.
What they're playing through,
and that's the real name of the game.
Every gig, every night, and go, yeah, we did our best.
Yeah, and it made me feel good. Made me feel best when I was playing through that rig. So.
Yeah.
Next question, Douglas Dorite. How do you guys deal with the
do right?
do right, Douglas? Yeah. Dude, that's hilarious. How do you guys deal with the older version was better mentality? This is happening all over the amp world, particularly. Yeah, like vintage or the original design was best and that sort of thing. Steve, you answer that. I'm running upstairs.
My answer is the older one was better to who? The thing that you experience as a player, your first impression with a particular amplifier, that's your first impression. So that's your baseline. That's your entree into a particular kind of amp or a particular style of playing music, right? So once you establish that, that's your go-to, that's your bottom line. And then from there you evolve, and you evolve as a player, and you make decisions that certain aspects of what I was doing before are going to get discarded and replaced with certain aspects of what I want to do now because I have the skill or the time to develop it, right? So you make these constant decisions going along, and then maybe you go back to an old rig and go, oh yeah, there was some really cool things about that I like, that I'd like to get back. And maybe you after a couple of years you might go back to an older piece of gear and go, yeah, there was something about that. But then after you're on that for a while, you go, oh yeah, now I remember why I wanted to evolve away from that, because there's these limitations imposed on me now that I know more. As players and artists and performers, we're constantly doing that because we're constantly growing. The people that aren't constantly growing or performing are kibitzing about the first Van Halen album versus the sound on the third Van Halen album, which arguably is different, and to a lot of people not as good. But in my conversations with John Shanks, who was working on the last album that they did with Dave, he was like, his conversation with Eddie was pretty much like, you try going back. Let's try rolling the clock back a little bit on the sound and kind of get back to some of the earlier stuff that you were doing is so cool. Maybe it's a good time to revisit that. And Eddie was just like, man, I don't play like that anymore. There was pushback because he felt like any accomplished forward-thinking artist would, why do I need to go backwards in my quest? I've seen actors react that way. Why don't you go blah 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 blah? And they would say, I don't feel compelled to revisit my past. I'm interested in what I'm going to do going forward. I'm interested in progressing my art and improving my art, my creativity. I don't have any interest in going backwards. I'm interested in going forwards. So there's the old stuff is the way it was because it was the way it was. Environmental, the way things were done, the technology that was available at the time.
Right.
Stuff, all that stuff was the way it was because that's the way it was.
And it was the pinnacle of what was available at that time.
And the stuff that's coming out now is the pinnacle of it, what's capable of being done now. And it's different than what it was then. In some cases, the stuff that's being made now can do all the stuff that what was made before could do, but it can do other things, and you have to be able to coax that stuff out.
Right.
And if you're skilled at it or even interested in doing that, you can do it. But a lot of times it's going to be the things that we're doing now are the things that people are going to play and go a few years from now are going to go, oh, the Deliverance 122 that Fryette made in 2021, that was when they really had the Deliverance thing nailed. And the 2025 Deliverance is going to be, it's not quite as good as the 2021. It's always going to be that way because people have a different perspective from the standpoint of time and place. That's really what drives that.
Right.
Personally,
I always think,
I think the slavish devotion to the old stuff. Yeah, when I played a couple of weeks ago, when I had that Magnetone thing that had just great memories from my early days, my early entree into what an amplifier does. It was wonderful to experience that and go, isn't that bitchin'? But my impression wasn't, we should go back to that. No, it was just like, that was the thing. It was a snapshot in time. Wonderful. Do I want to be there today? No. Well,
yeah, that's funny. I have this discussion, it seems like every several months with friends. Somebody will bring up, everybody's always bringing up Hendrix. And it's funny, like how people kind of view that man. Some people think like he's sort of frozen in time and like he would be using the same shit now that he did then. And I'm always saying, like, guys, no. Like he was always using like the newest stuff that people would shove in his hands, so my feeling is like he wasn't going to be concerned with some what Marshall was churning out in 1969 in 2021 if he was still playing. Like he would probably be like, he was always kind of a cutting edge dude, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was kind of like, well, whatever's new, let's make something new with this. And I can see the same thing with Ed. He's like, well, yeah, I mean, that number one Marshall with the the Variac and all that, like that's what I was using in 1977 because that's all I had and that was the best I could do. Why in the hell would I use that in 2011, 2012 when they did that last record when Shanks was trying to get him to use the number one Marshall? It's like, I mean, we all know as fans why we love the tone on the first Van Halen record. Yes, it's gainier than all the other records, and we know why that's kind of, the holy grail kind of thing. But if you put yourself in the shoes of Ed, the artist, like we don't know what he was gunning for in 77. We hear that tone and we go, that is the shit. But he might it's shit, but it's the best I can do in that time. And so anyway, you're a fair warning tone guy. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I'm kind of an Ed. Yeah, Hendrix was not into playing the oldies. Well, I don't know, man. He played the hell out of Johnny B. Good in 1970.
Jack Bruce once said, "Yeah, there's why don't you do old Cream songs and stuff like that?" And his answer was like, hey, there's a lot of people that can do that thing that they're known for over and over again, decade after decade after decade. And I can certainly appreciate that their ability to be able to do that. I'm just not them.
Yeah, right. And I get that.
Really diplomatic way of saying,
leave me alone. Let me do what I'm doing now.
I'm here now.
Yeah. I mean, even
Jethro Tull, the first Jethro Tull album's title was This Was. Here's the record that we made at the time that we recorded the record. And by the time you receive that record, we're not even the same people anymore. A year later.
I think even Hendrix was one of the first guys in the rock era to kind of say, look, if you want to hear my record, like just stay home and listen to the record. Like if you come to the live show, it's going to be a different thing entirely.
Hey, before we go completely off the rails, we need to bring a special guest in here and get to her questions, because the rest of these are kind of variations of what we already covered. And I think that we've done a pretty good job of that and gotten our point across.
Wait a minute. Do we actually have Niko-Chan?
We have, backed by special request by Joe, we have...
Oh my God, I need my snare drum to do a little...
We have
roll.
Niko-Chan, the Japanese doobie from Romper Room for you guys. Because apparently everybody loved her so much. And
I certainly do.
And she's got some questions that she wants to get in, and we want to get them done before we're back up to the stupid time mark that we are approaching anyway and trying our damnedest not to get to. But let's start off by hearing the doobie Japanese Niko-Chan song.
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Niko-Chan. Welcome to the show.
Oh, I think
Niko-Chan's holding something.
Niko-Chan, you've got a nice German beer stein going on there. Look at that. What have you been hitting on?
I've been drinking.
Huh?
I'm not drunk. I've just been drinking.
I'm not drunk. I'm just drinking.
Yeah.
I'm a little drunk. I'm not bashful.
Well, you guys starting this show, you guys said that's gonna be the cutting the time and making shorters, but
we blew it.
You guys blew it. Oh my God!
Hey, it was the question's fault, Niko-Chan.
I've been drinking and okay. I'm ready.
Well, what's the Niko-Chan song sound like when you're drunk? Can you remember it?
Oh.
Sorry, I'm back.
It's okay. Happens to the worst of us.
Okay. Yeah. Well, all right. I'm back.
Okay.
I'm back.
Niko-Chan, いつもよいこう。お返事、はい。元気に、はい。Niko-Chanで、はい。
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing me back again. You guys gonna pay me, right?
Wait a minute. Can I interject here? John's asking a question very tactfully. What the fuck was that? Can we explain what the fuck was that? Because it's kind of important before we go forward.
Oh, drunk. That's the answer.
Yeah, we're hitting it hard, John. And Niko-Chan is the Japanese version of the Romper Room doobie.
What the fuck was that?
I'm a Japanese version of a doobie, aka Niko-Chan.
Yeah, baby.
Only the Japanese people more than 50 years old remember that, I guess.
So Romper Room was a show, right? That
was internationally syndicated starting in the 50s.
And,
okay.
Show was canceled 1979.
Oh, so you've been out of a gig since 1979, Niko-Chan?
Yeah, I need a job.
That's a rough life.
I really need a job. Can you guys bring me back?
Sure.
Pay me.
Well, we'll use this as an interview and a job interview. And what we'll do is we'll have you throw some questions and interview us and see how you do.
Okay.
How about that?
I have some questions.
Okay, some
All right.
questions.
So today,
Niko-Chan, some questions.
I'm concerned today. So I have some questions. Steve,
Yes.
when you start live with your wife, um, moving to a new house, she found the box in the garage, and she opened it, and she's so surprised. There was fire red knee-high London boots in a box, and she was so upset because you are keeping ex-girlfriend's belongs. Well, actually, that was your stage costume, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right. Now, this is not rehearsed. I didn't know what these questions were going to be, but so
This is true. I was actually told this.
what she's talking about is I had a bunch of boxes stored in the garage, and she was organizing the garage, and my wife was organizing the garage, and she found a box that had some old clothes from my glam days in Seattle. And among them were these knee-high fire engine red platform heel boots.
Was it like
Oh, hell yeah.
And she thought that I was keeping my old girlfriend's clothes. And I went, no, those are mine. And she was like blown away. She couldn't believe it.
Was it like that?
Well, this is what they looked like. Just
Oh, yeah. You know, man, I'm thinking
not
an
only
encore.
did I wear
I'm
them,
thinking an encore.
I thought it was my question. So that was yours.
not only did I wear them,
What? Yeah, you were wearing. You told your wife. Then at that time you're already over 40s, 40 years old, right? You're like a 44, 40, whatever. Why you still keeping that boots? You think you're gonna still wear that boots again, or? That kind of but everybody's questions, Joe, you too, you guys still keeping your all the stage costume, like you guys never gonna use it, never gonna wear it, but you guys still keeping like tight black leather pants, or like
I run a pretty tight ship. I get rid of my stuff, man. I'm pretty
Yeah.
minimalist. Steve, I think you hold on to stuff longer.
I not as much anymore as I used to, but yeah, well, when you have place to keep stuff, you don't necessarily chuck everything out all the
Sure.
time. And I had a tendency to hang on to stuff just because it was in a box out of sight, out of mind for a long time. I was like that over the course but my wife is different. She was the kind of person that would get rid of things prematurely, and then she'd go, oh, why did I get rid of that? So
yeah, that's more me. Yeah.
over time, we've sort of each gone the other person's direction a little bit, I think.
Yeah, but you know what? She's still keeping her bondage costume she was wearing on the stage when she was joining a heavy metal band in the 90s. Just dig through her closet. You will find it. So I think there's a lot of people still keeping the costume you guys wearing on the stage. So why you kept that anyway? Why you kept the knee-high London boots, fire red London boots when you're over 40 years old? What did you going to do with them?
Yeah, good question. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe my
hand them down to the next generation, man.
Yeah.
and hey, I have a bone to pick here. It's not necessarily a bone, but Scott, you asked about this thing. When people talk about assless chaps, here's what I always think. Is there such a thing as chaps that have an ass? Because I think chaps don't have an ass. So that's like a, redundancy department of redundancy. Anyway, Niko-Chan, do you have another question?
Well, I had it, but I was so drunk and I don't remember it was, you guys took so long. I've been standby in the green room for a long time.
Yeah, we took forever.
Yeah, I've been drinking and drinking and drinking, and I don't remember anymore. That just bring me back again, and I can ask you guys another questions.
Okay. We'll save your next questions, Niko-Chan, and write them down.
Okay.
And the next time,
because this is worthwhile to mention right now. We're actually going to do because we went through a bunch of backlog of questions today. We're actually going to save a portion of the show from now on where we just go back and we pull the questions that we didn't answer from the previous show, and we'll answer them towards the end of the show, every single episode, so you guys aren't hanging that long. We'll try and get to kind of the aim is that by the end of each show we're kind of caught up on answering the questions for you guys. And I'm sure there are some actually in the comments tonight that we didn't answer, but we'll go through and call those, and we'll get those in the next episode.
Wayne, I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. I was like secretly, like subliminally thinking that I was going to come back at some point and do a Slade tribute band. That's awesome.
You know what? It's never too late to become who you could have been.
And nobody does it like Dave from Slade, man. That guy was
Steven's sweet. Yeah, you could do the sweet.
Sweet. I can do that sweet.
Love is like oxygen, Steve.
I can do Wizard. I can do
Wizard. Wow, now you're really dredging stuff up.
I'm a big glam rock fan, the child molester, I'm sorry, I shouldn't really say about that. The Gary Glitter,
Gary Glitter.
Yeah, I went through it. Everybody.
Yeah.
Well, should we wrap it up, guys?
Yeah, quick one for John. The PS100 is a mono power amp. So if you want to know how to run stereo effects with the PS100 and the BE100 together, send that question to support@fryette.com and Dave will help you with that.
All right, what do you think, guys? Is that it? We're wrapping it up?
Yeah. Thank you all for hanging out. Actually, this went pretty. Even though it took longer than we expected, we covered a lot of ground. And then thanks you guys for hanging out and for your questions, and keep them coming. They're good questions, and the answers are enlightening even for us, because we get to revisit that stuff and talk about it and vet it all out and get your feedback of the answers, which is also cool. So thanks mucho. Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Niko-Chan.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. We'll see you again soon.
See you guys.
Love you guys.
Yeah, we're going to do all this stuff. Thanks so much. You're all really funny. I love that. You guys crack me up constantly. and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Love you guys. Peace.